Martha Umbrell was a 46-year-old woman who lived in Franklin, Tennessee. She worked as a librarian at the local high school, Franklin High. Martha was well loved by students and teachers. She always had a warm smile and loved helping students find books that they would enjoy. Martha was passionate about reading and wanted everyone to love books as much as she did. Martha also enjoyed gardening. On weekends, she spent hours tending to her flower beds. Her garden was full of colorful flowers that brightened up her home. Besides books and gardening, Martha's greatest love was her family. She had 3 children, 17-year-old Jace, and 8-year-old twins named Cricket and Boost. Martha was a devoted mother who always put her children first. She made sure they had everything they needed and often helped them with their homework. Martha's husband, Thomas J. Umbrell, was an insurance agent. Though Thomas was often busy with work, he and Martha always made time for family. They often had family dinners and loved watching movies together. In May 2005, Martha was busy planning a summer vacation for her family. They talked about visiting Disney World, which made the kids very excited. At Franklin High School, Martha was preparing for the end of the school year. She helped students return their books and talked to them about summer reading plans. Martha organized a book fair to encourage students to read over the summer. Her colleagues admired her dedication and hard work. Martha's friends described her as kind and caring. She always made time to listen to others and offered help. She was a person who brought people together. Her home was often a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Martha loved hosting barbecues and garden parties where she served homemade dishes and shared gardening tips. Just days before her death, Martha was happy and excited about the future. She talked about planting new flowers in her garden and planning her family's trip to Disney World in the summer. Her tragic death shocked everyone who knew her, leaving a void in the community that loved her so much. On May 18, 2005, the weather in Franklin, Tennessee was clear and cool, the perfect weather for some time outdoors. Around 7:30 a.m., Thomas J. Umbrell, Martha's husband, reported her missing. Martha had not come home from work the previous day. Thomas was worried because it was not like her to disappear without saying anything. Later that afternoon, Ryan Jenkins, a local hiker, decided to take a walk in the nearby park, Franklin Park. It was a popular spot for people to enjoy nature, with many trails and picnic areas. As Ryan was walking along a secluded trail, he noticed something unusual. He saw a shape lying in the bushes off the path. Curious and a bit worried, he went closer to see what it was. To his horror, Ryan realized it was a naked woman's body. He quickly recognized her from the local news as Martha Umbrell, the missing librarian. Ryan was shocked and scared. His hands trembled as he pulled out his cell phone to call 911. He told the operator what he had found and waited there, trying to stay calm until the police arrived. The community was shocked by the news of Martha's death. It was reported on local TV channels like WKRN and in newspapers like the Tennessean. People were scared and heartbroken, as Martha was a well-loved member of the community. As the news spread, more details emerged about the investigation, but the exact cause of Martha's death remained unclear at that point. Everyone waited anxiously for more information from the police. When the police arrived at the crime scene in Franklin Park, it was around 2:00 p.m. on May 18, 2005. Detective Sarah Owens and Officer Mark Davis, known for their careful and thorough work, led the investigation. They carefully approached the area where naked Martha's body was found. The scene was incredibly disturbing. Martha's body showed signs of a violent attack. Detective Owens noted the blood around Martha's body and the severe injuries. It was clear that she had been beaten with a blunt object. Parts of her body were also missing, which was strange and alarming. The officers initially thought she might have been attacked by a wild animal after her death. Ryan Jenkins, a hiker who found Martha, was visibly shaken. He told the police everything he had seen and done since discovering the body. The police thanked him for his help and assured him they would find out what happened. Detective Owens and Officer Davis quickly secured the area to make sure no evidence was disturbed. They called in a team of forensic experts to help gather clues. The experts used tools like cameras to take detailed photos of the scene and special kits to collect samples of blood and other possible evidence. They wore gloves to avoid contaminating anything. The police worked carefully to understand what had happened. They found sleeping pills in Martha's system, indicating she had been drugged before being attacked. This discovery was made by the medical examiner, Dr. Linda Bastardi, who performed an autopsy on Martha's body. Dr. Bastardi was an experienced medical examiner known for her precise work. As they searched the area, the police found a baseball bat with blood on it, hidden under some bushes nearby. This was likely the weapon used to attack Martha. They collected fingerprints and any other DNA they could find on the bat. The scene was very bloody, suggesting a violent struggle. Detective Owens interviewed people in the park and nearby areas to see if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. A few witnesses reported hearing strange noises late in the evening, but didn't think much of it at the time. These small pieces of information were added to the growing file on the case. The local news, including TV stations like WKRN and newspapers like the Tennis-Shin, reported on the case extensively. People in Franklin were freaked out of their minds. Many couldn't believe such a horrific crime had happened in their peaceful town. Detective Owens assured the public that they were doing everything they could to find out who was responsible for Martha's death. As the investigation continued, the police knew they had to act quickly to solve this terrible crime and bring justice for Martha and her family. The first suspect the police investigated was Thomas J. Umbrell, Martha's 61-year-old husband. Thomas worked as an insurance agent and was known for being a devoted husband and father. However, recently he had been showing signs of stress due to financial troubles. Thomas was the one who reported Martha missing when she didn't return home from work. Detective Sarah Owens and Officer Mark Davis brought Thomas in for questioning at the Franklin Police Department. The interview room was small and quiet, with just a table and a few chairs. Thomas looked visibly upset and tired. Detective Owens started by asking him to recount the events of the day Martha went missing. Thomas explained that he last saw Martha when she left for work in the morning. He said he became worried when she didn't come home by dinner time. He tried calling her cell phone, but there was no answer. He called some of her friends and coworkers, but no one had seen her. Finally, he called the police early the next morning. The police asked Thomas about their financial situation, noting the recent stress he had been under. Thomas admitted they were having money problems, but he insisted he would never hurt Martha. He spoke about their plans for a family vacation to Disney World, America's #1 destination for families, and how they were looking forward to spending time together. Thomas's emotional state was evident throughout the interrogation. He was cooperative and answered all questions, but he was also clearly distraught. The police asked if there were any problems in their marriage or if Martha had any enemies. Thomas said their marriage was strong and that they frequently had sex with each other, and he couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt her. The police also searched Thomas' office and car for any signs of involvement in Martha's death. They didn't find anything suspicious. His coworkers described him as a hardworking and honest man, but they had noticed he seemed more stressed than usual lately. Thomas' alibi checked out. He was seen by neighbors at home during the time Martha went missing, and his phone records showed he made calls to friends and family looking for her. While the financial troubles could have been a possible motive, there was no solid evidence linking him to the crime. As the investigation continued, Thomas remained a person of interest, but the police needed more evidence to determine his involvement. The search for Martha's killer continued as the police looked into other potential suspects. The second suspect the police investigated was Samantha Riley, a 27-year-old coworker of Martha's at Franklin High School. Samantha was known for her strong-willed and outspoken personality. Martha had been seen arguing with her a few days before her disappearance, which led to speculation about a possible motive. Detective Sarah Owens and Officer Mark Davis brought Samantha in for questioning at the Franklin Police Department. Samantha arrived looking nervous but determined. The interview room was the same small, quiet space where they had interviewed Thomas. Detective Owens began by asking Samantha about her relationship with Martha. Samantha explained that she and Martha had worked together in the school library for several years. They usually got along well enough, but recently things had gotten tense. Samantha claimed that Martha had started to sexually harass her, making lewd comments and touching her inappropriately, and that she was scared she might lose her job as she reported it. She insisted that their argument was about this harassment. When asked where she was on the day Martha went missing, Samantha said she had gone home after work and stayed there. She lived alone in a small apartment nearby. The police checked her alibi, but of course, no one could confirm that she was home that evening. Detective Owens asked Samantha if she had any involvement in Martha's death. Samantha became defensive and emotional, firmly denying any wrongdoing. She said she was upset about the harassment but would never harm Martha. Samantha's reaction was a mix of anger and fear. She felt like she was being unfairly accused because of the harassment she experienced. The police also searched Samantha's apartment for any signs of involvement in a crime. They found no evidence linking her to Martha's death. However, they did find notes from the school about the harassment complaint, which supported Samantha's story about their argument. Samantha's co-workers were interviewed as well. Some mentioned that she and Martha, known for her earthy sense of humor, had been make more off-color comments more frequently. But none believed Samantha was capable of such violence. They described her as a passionate but kind person who often stood up for herself and others. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the police continued to consider Samantha a suspect due to the recent conflict with Martha. As the investigation moved forward, the police kept searching for more clues. Samantha's case was still open, but without solid evidence, the police needed to look at other potential suspects to solve the mystery of Martha's tragic death. On May 21, 2005, the weather in Franklin, Tennessee was warm and sunny. Around 10 o'clock a.m., Detective Sarah Owens received a call from Officer Mark Davis about new evidence in the case. Dr. Linda Bastardi, who coincidentally was a championship runner, had found something unusual while running in the woods near Franklin Park. She often ran in the mornings and knew the area well. Linda had spotted a torn piece of clothing and a small metal box hidden under some leaves. She immediately called the police, remembering Martha Umbrell's murder. Detective Owens and Officer Davis quickly went to the scene. They thanked her for her help and began examining the new evidence. The torn piece of clothing matched the outfit Martha had been seen wearing on the day she disappeared. Inside the metal box, they found several handwritten notes and some strange drawings. The notes seemed to be written by someone in distress. They mentioned feeling trapped and wanting to escape. The drawings were dark and disturbing, showing violent scenes and strange symbols. Detective Owens carefully bagged the evidence and took it back to the police station for further analysis. They brought in a handwriting expert to compare the notes with samples of writing from people close to the case. The expert concluded that the notes were written by Jace Umbrell, Martha's 17-year-old son. This discovery was significant. Jace had been struggling with severe psychological issues, often experiencing intense hallucinations and delusions caused by his addiction to marijuana. Martha had discovered his obsession with cannibalism and had been trying to get Jace the help he desperately needed, but had faced resistance from insurance companies and healthcare providers. The police decided it was time to question Jace again, this time more thoroughly. The third suspect the police investigated was Jace Umbrell, Martha's 17-year-old son. Jace was a high school student at Franklin High School where his mother worked. His behavior had recently become more erratic, and his family knew he often experienced intense hallucinations and delusions, worsened by his constant pot smoking. Detective Sarah Owens and Officer Mark Davis brought Jace in for questioning at the Franklin Police Department. The interview room was the same small, quiet space used before. Jace appeared anxious and confused, fidgeting in his chair. Detective Owens started by asking Jace about his relationship with his mother. Jace described Martha as a loving and caring mother who always tried to help him. He said she was the only person who understood him and was always there for him. However, he also mentioned feeling a lot of pressure and stress from trying to meet her expectations and his own mental health struggles. When asked about the day his mother went missing, Jace's answers were scattered and inconsistent. He mentioned spending the day at home smoking marijuana and playing video games. The police found his alibi weak and unconvincing. They decided to press further, asking about his recent internet activity. Jace admitted to being part of an online community that discussed cannibalism and other dark topics. He said he was drawn to these discussions because they made him feel understood and provided a sense of belonging. Jace's behavior during the interrogation was erratic. At times, he seemed calm and detached. Other times, he was visibly agitated and upset. The police also searched Jace's room for more evidence. They found disturbing drawings and notes similar to those discovered earlier. These drawings showed violent scenes and strange symbols. The notes revealed Jace's deep psychological distress and fascination with cannibalism. Among his belongings, they also found a blood-stained baseball bat, which matched the weapon used in Martha's murder. Detective Owens asked Jace directly about his involvement in his mother's death. Jace initially denied any involvement but then made an unforgettable statement. "My mom tasted like Lunchables." This shocking statement confirmed the police's worst fears. Jace had not only killed his mother, but had also cannibalized her body, believing it would give him her strength and wisdom. With this confession, the police had enough evidence to charge Jace with the murder of his mother, Martha Umbrell. The investigation now turned towards ensuring justice was served for Martha and her grieving family. On May 23, 2005, the weather in Franklin, Tennessee was overcast with a light drizzle, but police were now certain that Jace Umbrell, Martha's 17-year-old son, was responsible for her murder. Jace's confession, combined with the evidence found in his room, painted a clear picture of what had happened. Jace believed that consuming his mother's flesh would give him her strength and wisdom. This delusion stemmed from his marijuana-induced psychosis and was fueled by an online community that glorified cannibalism. Detective Sarah Owens and Officer Mark Davis decided to arrest Jace. They arrived at the Umbrell home around 11 o'clock a.m. Jace was in his room, listening to Eminem and playing Grand Theft Auto. When the police knocked on his door, Jace seemed dazed and confused. Detective Owens informed him that he was under arrest for the murder of his mother, Martha Umbrell. Jace did not resist the arrest. He was calm but appeared to be in a state of shock. As he was led out of the house in handcuffs, the media, including reporters from TV stations like WKRN and newspapers like the Tennessean, gathered outside. Jace shocked everyone by shouting, "My mom tasted like Lunchables." This bizarre statement added to the horror and confusion surrounding the case. Martha's family was devastated by the news. Her husband, Thomas Umbrell, was heartbroken and in disbelief that their son could commit such a heinous act. The community of Franklin, known for its peaceful atmosphere, was deeply shaken. Friends and neighbors struggled to comprehend the tragedy. With Jace in custody, the police continued to gather evidence to ensure a strong case for the upcoming trial. They reviewed his internet history, which revealed extensive interactions with the online cannibalism community. They also found more disturbing drawings and notes that provided insight into Jace's troubled mind. As news of Jace's arrest spread, the local community was filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. People were relieved that the murderer had been caught, but the fact that it was Martha's own son made the situation even more tragic. Detective Owens and Officer Davis worked tirelessly to prepare for the trial. They wanted to ensure that justice was served for Martha and her family. The evidence against Jace was overwhelming, and the police were confident that the trial would result in a conviction. The trial of Jace Umbrell began on September 12, 2005, in Franklin, Tennessee. The courtroom was filled with reporters from TV stations and newspapers. The community was eager for justice for Martha Umbrell. The prosecutor, Alan Matthews, was a 45-year-old attorney known for his sharp mind and dedication to justice. He presented the case against Jace, detailing the gruesome evidence and Jace's confession. Matthews argued that Jace, influenced by his severe mental illness and the online cannibalism community, had brutally murdered his mother. He emphasized the premeditation and the horrific nature of the crime, pushing for the maximum penalty. The defense attorney, Rachel Breezy Kelly, a 38-year-old lawyer with a calm demeanor and strong reputation for defending troubled youths, represented Jace. She argued that Jace's actions were a result of his severe mental illness and marijuana-induced psychosis. Breezy Kelly emphasized that Jace needed psychiatric help, not a harsh prison sentence. She presented evidence of Jace's long history of mental health issues and his mother's efforts to get in treatment, which were hindered by insurance companies and healthcare providers. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with a verdict. On September 15, 2005, they found Jace Umbrell guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, mindful of Jace's mental health issues, sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, also mandating psychiatric treatment. The verdict brought mixed reactions. Alan Matthews, the prosecutor, felt justice had been served, ensuring that Jace would be held accountable for his actions. Rachel Breezy Kelly, the defense attorney, expressed relief that Jace would receive psychiatric help, but she had hoped for a lighter sentence. Martha's family was devastated but relieved that the trial was over. Thomas, Jess's father, struggled with the outcome, torn between the love for his son and the horror of losing his wife in such a brutal manner. Friends and neighbors felt the sentence was fair, balancing justice for Martha and the need for Jace to receive treatment. The trial's conclusion left the community in Franklin trying to heal. The media coverage had been extensive, and many hoped that the case would bring attention to the challenges families face when seeking mental health treatment. The Umbrell family, supported by the community, began the long process of moving forward, honoring Martha's memory and coping with the tragic loss. After the trial of Jace Umbrell, life in Franklin, Tennessee, slowly returned to normalcy. The Umbrell family, still reeling from the tragic loss of Martha, tried to piece their lives back together. Thomas Umbrell, Martha's husband, sought solace in his work as an insurance agent, finding distraction and purpose in helping his clients. Jace Umbrell, now serving his sentence at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, received psychiatric treatment as part of his rehabilitation. His case brought attention to the gaps in mental health care, prompting discussions about improving access to treatment for those in need. As time passed, the wounds left by Martha's death began to heal, though the pain of her absence remained. The family found solace in memories of happier times, cherishing the moments they had shared together. Thomas focused on providing a stable and loving home for their surviving children, Cricket and Boost, who struggled to understand the loss of their mother. In the years following Martha's death, the Umbrell family found moments of peace and healing amidst the pain. They honored Martha's memory through acts of kindness and service, keeping her spirit alive in their hearts. The community of Franklin continued to offer support, standing together in solidarity against the darkness that had touched their lives. Julie Lewis was 18 years old. She lived in Payette, Idaho, a small town known for its friendly people and beautiful landscapes. Julie was in her senior year of high school and was known for her beauty and intelligence. She dreamed of going to college and starting a new life away from the troubles she faced at home. Julie's life had been tough. Her mother died of cancer when Julie was only 14. This loss left a big hole in her life. Her father, Coney Lewis, was a police officer who worked long hours. Julie often felt lonely and started seeking the company of older men who could offer her the stability and comfort she missed. Some people thought Julie was manipulative, using her looks and charm to get what she wanted. Others believed she was just trying to survive in a world that had not been kind to her. In school, Julie was an honor roll student. Her friends described her as ambitious and determined, always talking about her plans for the future. She wanted to study business at the University of Idaho and one day own her own company. Julie's teachers saw her potential and often praised her hard work and dedication. In the days leading up to her death, Julie was busy preparing for her high school graduation. She bought a new dress for the occasion and was excited about the graduation ceremony. She talked to her friends about their plans for the summer. They planned to visit the local mall, go to the movies, and spend time at the nearby Snake River. Julie also had a part-time job at a local diner, where she saved up money for college. She was well-liked by her coworkers and customers for her friendly and outgoing personality. Despite her troubles, Julie tried to stay positive. She had a close-knit group of friends who supported her. They often hung out at local spots like the Payette Skate Park and the community swimming pool. Julie was also involved in her school's drama club, where she enjoyed acting and working behind the scenes. Julie's dreams were big, but her life was cut short. She had plans and ambitions, but she never got the chance to see them through. Her death shocked the small town of Payette, leaving everyone wondering what could have been. On the morning of June 5, 2012, Tony Lewis came home after his night shift as a police officer. Comey expected to find his daughter Julie still asleep. Instead, he found a horrifying scene. Julie's lifeless body was on the floor of her bedroom. The room was in disarray, with items scattered everywhere. Julie had been brutally attacked. She was bludgeoned with a rock from outside their home and then strangled with a belt. Tony was shocked and devastated. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Fighting through his grief and panic, Tony called 911 to report the crime. His voice trembled as he told the dispatcher what had happened. Despite his training and experience as a police officer, nothing could have prepared him for this. The news of Julie's murder spread quickly through the small town of Payette. Payette hadn't seen a murder in over 20 years, and the community was in shock. Julie was well known and liked by many. Her death was a terrible blow to the town. When the first responders arrived, they found Tony outside, distraught and in tears. The sight inside Julie's room was gruesome. Blood was spattered on the walls, and the signs of a struggle were clear. Julie's face was bruised, and there were ulcers around her neck from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used in the attack lay nearby, covered in blood. The paramedics pronounced Julie dead at the scene. Tony could only watch in despair as they did their job. He was overwhelmed with grief, unable to comprehend how someone could do this to his daughter. Neighbors started to gather outside the Lewis home, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. Reporters from local news outlets soon arrived, their cameras and microphones capturing the tragic scene. They interviewed some of the neighbors, who spoke of their shock and sadness. Julie's friends and classmates were devastated by the news. Many of them had seen her just the day before at school, laughing and talking about their future plans. Now those plans would never come true. The school counselors were brought in to help the students cope with their grief. The entire town mourned the loss of a bright, young life taken too soon. The police arrived quickly at the Lewis home on the morning of June 5, 2012. Leading the investigation was Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts, a seasoned investigator known for her thoroughness and dedication. She had solved many tough cases in her career and was determined to find justice for Julie. The crime scene was horrific. Julie's bedroom was in chaos, with items strewn everywhere. Blood spattered the walls and signs of a violent struggle were evident. Julie's body lay on the floor, her face bruised and neck, marked from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used to bludgeon her lay nearby, covered in blood. Detective Roberts and her team began their meticulous work. Detective Roberts, along with Officer Olson Benson, a local officer with 15 years on the force, started by securing the area to prevent contamination of evidence. They took photos of the entire scene, capturing every detail. They used luminol to detect any hidden bloodstains and collected fingerprints from various surfaces. The investigators also bagged the rock and belt as key pieces of evidence. Detective Roberts noticed several things right away. The window in Julie's room was slightly open, suggesting someone might have entered or exited through it. There were scratches on the windowsill, possibly from the killer climbing in or out. Outside, footprints in the garden soil indicated someone had recently been there. The team interviewed Tony Lewis, who was still in shock. He recounted finding Julie and calling 911. His grief was palpable, and Detective Roberts felt his pain as a father. Despite his emotional state, Tony provided all the information he could, hoping it would help catch his daughter's killer. The local news outlets, including the Payette Times, covered the story extensively. Reporters interviewed residents and followed every development closely. The town was gripped by fear and sadness, unable to believe such a brutal crime could happen in their peaceful community. As the investigation continued, Detective Roberts and her team worked tirelessly. They analyzed the evidence collected, hoping to find clues that would lead them to the murderer. They checked for any connections Julie might have had with known criminals and looked into her recent activities. The community's support for the police was strong. People brought food and coffee to the officers working long hours. Local businesses put up posters offering rewards for information leading to the arrest of Julie's killer. The town of Payette, once quiet and serene, now united in their quest for justice. The first suspect the police investigated was Harold Henderson. Harold, aged 70, was a retired used car salesman who lived in Payette. He was well known in the town for his flashy personality and competitive nature. Despite his age, Harold had a reputation for being charming and wealthy, making him popular in the local social scene. He was a widower, living alone in a large house filled with memorabilia from his younger days. Harold's connection to Julie Lewis came to light quickly. It was discovered that he had been romantically involved with Julie. Some residents of Payette knew about their relationship and whispered about the odd pairing. Harold's interest in Julie raised eyebrows, but in a small town, people often keep secrets. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Harold in for questioning on June 6, 2012. They wanted to understand the nature of his relationship with Julie and determine if he had a motive for her murder. Harold arrived at the police station dressed neatly, his demeanor calm but slightly defensive. During the interrogation, Harold admitted to his relationship with Julie but denied any involvement in her death. He claimed they had a consensual sexual relationship, started only after she turned 18, and that he cared deeply for her. However, Harold's competitive streak, especially with his twin brother Alan, suggested a possible motive. Harold and Alan had a long history of rivalry, and both had been vying for Julie's attention. Harold's calm and confident demeanor began to waver as Detective Roberts pressed him on his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Harold stated he was at home, watching a rerun of NCIS on CBS. He insisted he had no reason to harm Julie and was shocked by her death. However, his answers were vague, and he couldn't provide a solid alibi. The police also investigated Harold's financial records. They found that he had been giving Julie money regularly, which could have been a source of tension if he discovered she was manipulating him. Harold's phone record showed multiple calls and messages to Julie in the days leading up to her death, indicating frequent communication. Despite his denials, the police felt Harold had the motive and opportunity to commit the crime. His history of competitiveness with Alan and his romantic involvement with Julie painted a troubling picture. The investigators kept a close eye on Harold, looking for any inconsistencies in his story and waiting for any evidence that might link him directly to the murder. As the investigation continued, Harold remained a prime suspect. His flamboyant personality and competitive nature, coupled with his involvement with Julie, made him a central figure in the case. The town of Payette watched closely as the police worked to uncover the truth behind Julie's tragic death. The second suspect in the investigation was Alan Henderson, Harold's twin brother. Alan, also 70 years old, was a retired high school history teacher. Known for his intellect and passion for teaching, Alan was respected and well-liked in Payette. He had a reputation for being level-headed and scholarly, a stark contrast to his more flamboyant brother. Alan had never married and was often seen as a bachelor who enjoyed his solitude. He spent much of his time reading and participating in community events. Despite his age, Alan had a magnetic personality that attracted people of all ages. He was particularly fond of attending local book clubs and giving lectures at the town library. The police discovered that Alan, like his brother, had also been romantically involved with Julie Lewis. This revelation shocked many in the town, as Alan was viewed as a more reserved and dignified figure. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Alan in for questioning on June 7, 2012, to understand his relationship with Julie and his potential motives. Alan arrived at the police station looking composed, dressed in a tweed jacket that hinted at his scholarly background. During the interrogation, he admitted to his relationship with Julie, but insisted it was platonic. He explained that he enjoyed her company and found her bright and ambitious. Alan's affection for Julie was evident, but he denied any romantic involvement. Detective Roberts pressed Alan about his whereabouts on the night of Julie's murder. Alan stated he was at home, working on a lecture for the local historical society. He mentioned reading a book about the Civil War, a topic he was passionate about. However, his alibi was weak, as he lived alone and had no witnesses to confirm his story. Alan's demeanor during the interrogation was calm but saddened. He expressed disbelief that Julie could be dead. He cooperated fully with the police, providing them with his phone records and access to his home. The investigators found nothing suspicious at his residence, but they continued to scrutinize his interactions with Julie. The police also interviewed people who knew Alan. His colleagues and former students spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated teacher who cared deeply about education. Despite his calm exterior, the possibility of betrayal by Julie could have triggered a strong emotional response. As the investigation progressed, Alan remained a key suspect. His scholarly nature and apparent innocence contrasted sharply with the dark motives uncovered. The police continued to explore every lead, determined to uncover the truth behind Julie's murder and the Henderson brothers' involvement. The third suspect in Julie Lewis' murder investigation was her father, Tony Lewis. Tony, 45, was a police officer in Payette, Idaho. Known for his protective nature, Tony was a well-liked figure in the community. He had become close to the Henderson brothers over the years, often acting as a mediator between the two. Tony's connection to Julie was evident, as he was her father and lived next door to Alan Henderson. The police had to consider every possibility, even the uncomfortable one that Tony might be involved. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson decided to question Tony on June 8, 2012. Tony was still reeling from the shock of finding his daughter's body. When he arrived at the police station, he looked tired and grief-stricken. During the interrogation, Tony recounted his actions on the night of the murder. He had been working a night shift, which he often did to provide for Julie after the death of her mother. Tony insisted he had no reason to harm his daughter and was devastated by her death. Detective Roberts asked Tony about his relationship with the Henderson brothers. Tony admitted he knew about their interest in Julie and had tried to keep the peace between them. He expressed his frustration over their rivalry, which had caused tension in the neighborhood. Despite this, Tony was adamant that he had no involvement in the crime. The police looked into Tony's background and found no history of violence or misconduct. His colleagues at the police department spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated officer and loving father. However, the investigators had to consider the possibility that Tony's protective instincts might have driven him to a breaking point. Tony provided his phone records and cooperated fully with the investigation. The record showed he had been on duty at the time of the murder, but the police needed to verify this alibi thoroughly. They checked surveillance footage from the police station and confirmed Tony's presence there during the critical hours. The police also interviewed neighbors and friends of Tony, Most described him as a caring father who was deeply affected by his wife's death and determined to give Julie a better life. Some, however, mentioned that Tony had become more stressed and irritable in recent months, possibly due to the pressure of raising a teenager alone. Despite Tony's grief and cooperation, the police had to keep all possibilities open. His close proximity to the crime scene and his protective nature were significant factors in the investigation. Detective Roberts and her team continued to examine every piece of evidence, knowing that solving the case required looking at every angle, no matter how painful. As the investigation unfolded, Tony remained under scrutiny. The small town of Payette watched closely, hoping for answers and justice for Julie. The police were determined to find the truth, and Tony's involvement, if any, would be uncovered through their relentless efforts. On June 10, 2012, around 3:00 p.m., new evidence came to light. The weather was warm and sunny, typical for Payette in early summer. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts received the call from a local hiker who had found something unusual near the Snake River. He had been walking his dog when he noticed a small bag hidden under some rocks. Detective Roberts and Officer Olsen Benson rushed to the scene. They found a small black bag containing a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. The items were immediately taken into evidence. The police believed these items could be crucial in solving Julie's murder. Back at the station, the forensic team examined the evidence. The blood on the shirt matched Julie's. This was a significant breakthrough. The gloves were tested for fingerprints, and the results came back with a match to Harold Henderson. This finding shifted the focus back to Harold, who had previously denied being near the crime scene. Detective Roberts and her team re-examined Harold's alibi. They discovered inconsistencies in his story. Further analysis of his phone records showed he had been near Julie's house at the time of the murder, contradicting his claim of being at home watching TV. The new evidence prompted the police to search Harold's home again. This time, they found a hidden compartment in his garage with several items that raised suspicion, including a second pair of gloves and a belt similar to the one used to strangle Julie. These discoveries painted a clearer picture of Harold's involvement. As the investigation deepened, the police interviewed more witnesses. They found out that Harold had been seen arguing with Julie the day before her death. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, reported hearing raised voices and seeing Harold leave Julie's house looking angry. With the new evidence, Detective Roberts felt confident they were closing in on the truth. The police brought Harold in for another round of questioning. This time, his demeanor was less confident. Confronted with the evidence, Harold became defensive and struggled to maintain his earlier calmness. The forensic team continued to analyze the evidence, looking for any additional clues. They used advanced techniques like DNA testing and fiber analysis to ensure nothing was overlooked. The detailed investigation paid off as more links between Harold and the crime were uncovered. By the end of the week, the police were confident they had enough evidence to make an arrest. The discovery of the bag near the Snake River had been the breakthrough they needed. The town of Payette waited anxiously for justice to be served. On June 12, 2012, the police were ready to make an arrest. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts had pieced together the evidence pointing to Harold Henderson as the murderer. Harold, 70, was a retired used car salesman known for his flamboyant personality and competitive nature. His charm and wealth made him a popular figure in Payette, but his rivalry with his twin brother Alan and romantic involvement with Julie Lewis revealed a darker side. Harold had been competing with Alan for Julie's affection. He had given Julie money regularly and felt betrayed when he discovered her plan to blackmail him and Alan. On the night of June 4, Harold confronted Julie at her home. The argument turned violent, leading Harold to bludgeon her with a rock he found outside and strangle her with a belt. Driven by anger and betrayal, Harold committed the brutal murder. Detective Roberts had discovered inconsistencies in Harold's alibi and found crucial evidence, like the blood-stained shirt and gloves, linking him to the crime. The DNA and fingerprints on the gloves match Harold's, and the blood on the shirt was Julie's. Surveillance footage also placed Harold near Julie's house at the time of the murder. On the morning of June 12, Detective Roberts and Officer Olsen Benson went to Harold's house to arrest him. They arrived at 9:00 a.m., and Harold was at home. When they told him he was under arrest for Julie's murder, Harold looked shocked but didn't resist. He was handcuffed and taken to the police station. At the station, Harold was formally charged with murder. His reaction was one of disbelief and anger. He insisted he was innocent, claiming the evidence was planted. Despite his protests, the overwhelming evidence convinced the police of his guilt. Julie's father, Tony Lewis, was informed about the arrest. He was devastated but relieved that the police had found the person responsible for his daughter's death. The town of Payette, which had been closely following the investigation, felt a mix of shock and relief. They couldn't believe someone they knew so well could commit such a heinous crime. As Harold was taken into custody, the town hoped for justice for Julie. Her friends and family gathered to support each other, remembering Julie for her beauty, intelligence, and dreams of a better future. The arrest brought some closure, but the pain of losing Julie would remain with them forever. The evidence against Harold was strong, and the police were confident they had the right person. The case now moved to the courts, where Harold would face trial for his actions. The community waited anxiously for the trial, hoping for a verdict that would bring justice for Julie. Harold Henderson's trial began on July 15, 2012, in Payette County Court. The courtroom was filled with Julie Lewis' family and local residents eager to see justice served. The case received extensive coverage from local news outlets, including the Payette Times and KTVB Channel 7, which kept the community updated on the trial's progress. The prosecutor, Emily Hackle Matchwork, 38, was known for her strong courtroom presence and dedication to seeking justice. Hackle Matchwork argued that Harold Henderson was guilty of brutally murdering Julie Lewis. She presented a clear case, showing evidence such as the blood-stained shirt and gloves found near the Snake River, Harold's fingerprints on the murder weapon, and surveillance footage placing him at Julie's house on the night of the crime. Hackle Matchwork described the crime as an act of rage and betrayal, emphasizing how Harold's rivalry with his twin brother and his manipulative behavior towards Julie led to her tragic death. The defense attorney, Drew Nils, 45, was a respected lawyer with a reputation for defending high-profile cases. Nils argued that the evidence against Harold was circumstantial and that his client was being falsely accused. He suggested that Harold's emotional state and previous arguments with Julie did not prove guilt. Mills attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence, arguing that it was possible someone else could have committed the murder. Julie's family attended the trial every day. Her father, Tony Lewis, appeared exhausted but resolute. He was seen comforting Julie's friends and family, who were deeply affected by the trial. The emotional weight of the case was evident as testimonies about Julie's life and dreams were presented in court. After several weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on August 5, 2012. Harold Henderson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow from the courtroom. Julie's family, while devastated by her loss, felt a sense of justice had been achieved. Sentencing took place on August 12, 2012. Harold was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, Honorable David Thompson, stated that the crime was particularly heinous due to its brutality and the betrayal involved. The sentence was seen by many as a fitting punishment for the crime. The trial's conclusion had a profound impact on the community. Payette, a town that had not seen such a violent crime in years, was left to heal. Julie's friends and family continued to honor her memory, focusing on her dreams and aspirations rather than the tragic end of her life. The case served as a stark reminder of the impact of violence and the importance of justice in a close-knit community. After Harold Henderson's trial and sentencing, life in Payette, Idaho, began to slowly return to normal. The town had been deeply affected by Julie Lewis' murder and the dramatic court case that followed. Payette, known for its close-knit community and small-town charm, was shaken by the violence and the betrayal that came to light. Julie's father, Tony Lewis, continued to cope with the loss of his daughter. He took a leave of absence from his job as a police officer to focus on his grief and to support Julie's memory. Tony began speaking at local schools about the importance of communication and the dangers of manipulation, hoping to prevent similar tragedies in the future. His efforts were met with support from the community, who admired his strength and resilience. Harold Henderson's life took a dramatic turn after his conviction. He was transferred to the Idaho State Penitentiary, where he began serving his life sentence. Harold's high-profile case and the nature of his crime made him a notable inmate, but he kept a low profile in prison. His flamboyant personality and competitive nature were replaced by a more subdued and reflective demeanor. The prison system provided Harold with counseling, but it did little to ease the weight of his actions. Alan Henderson, Harold's twin brother, also had to deal with the aftermath. Though he was cleared of any involvement in Julie's murder, the case had taken a toll on him emotionally. Alan withdrew from the social scene and focused on personal reflection. He He continued to live in Payette, where he was known for his quiet and reserved nature. The community remained supportive of Alan, understanding that he had been a victim of his brother's actions as much as Julie's family had been. As time passed, Payette slowly moved forward. The town's recovery was marked by a sense of healing and unity, with residents coming together to support one another. The memory of Julie Lewis lived on through the scholarship and charity events, reminding everyone of her life and the impact of her tragic death. Harold Hal Griffin was a man many people in Kokomo, Indiana, knew well. At 63 years old, he had spent over 3 decades managing a grocery store chain that was popular in the community. Hal had a way of making people feel welcome, whether they were customers or employees. His friendly smile and sharp business skills made him respected in his hometown. After retiring, Hal moved to Prescott, Arizona, in search of a quieter life. Prescott, known for its mild weather and beautiful landscapes, was a popular destination for retirees. Hal settled into this peaceful town, spending his days gardening, attending local events, and relaxing. But Hal's life wasn't as simple as it appeared. His marriage to Mary had been troubled for years, mostly because of her declining health. Mary had been diagnosed with brain cancer, which had taken a toll on both of them. Hal, feeling lonely and emotionally drained, started looking for comfort elsewhere. He began seeing other men for sex, but only a few close friends knew about this very secret part of his life. Hal found particular comfort in sexual relationships with 2 other men, Lenny Bartholf and Pete Peterson. Lenny, a 60-year-old retired banker from Minnesota, had been Hal's first male lover. Lenny was deeply attached to Hal, believing they would eventually be together once Mary's health declined further. The third person in this love triangle was Pete Peterson, a 56-year-old insurance adjuster who also lived in Prescott. Pete's relationship with Hal was more casual, with the 2 meeting every now and then for quick sex, but he secretly hoped that Hal would leave both Mary and Lenny to start a new life with him. In the days leading up to his death, Hal seemed preoccupied. He had confided in a close friend that he was considering making big changes in his life. Hal was torn between his responsibilities at home and his desires for freedom and happiness. Unfortunately, his hopes for a fresh start would be cut short by the tragic events that soon unfolded. On the afternoon of July 15, 2011, Prescott, Arizona, was experiencing its typical summer weather, hot and dry, with temperatures reaching the mid-90s. It was around 2:30 p.m. when Mary Griffin, Hal's wife, realized she hadn't seen him all day. This was unusual, as Hal usually spent his mornings tending to his garden or reading the newspaper on the porch. Concerned, Mary decided to check the house, starting with the kitchen, where Hal often prepared their lunch. As she entered the kitchen, Mary was met with a scene of horror. Hal was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, his body still and lifeless. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen. The kitchen was in disarray, with broken dishes and overturned chairs scattered around the room, evidence of a violent struggle. The sight overwhelmed Mary, who was already frail due to her illness. Her initial reaction was shock, followed by a wave of panic. Struggling to maintain her composure, Mary managed to dial 911, her voice trembling as she reported what she had found. The 911 operator, sensing the urgency in Mary's voice, immediately dispatched police and emergency medical services to the Griffin residence. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Hal had been dead for several hours by the time they arrived. Mary, distraught and in shock, was taken to the hospital as a precaution. She was unable to provide much information to the authorities, her mind struggling to process the horrific scene she had just witnessed. The discovery of Hal's body sent shockwaves through the quiet Prescott community. Neighbors, who were used to the tranquility of their retirement paradise, were suddenly thrust into the middle of a murder investigation. As news spread, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Something terrible had happened in the Griffin household, and the search for answers was just beginning. Detective Robert Bob Jensen arrived at the Griffin residence on the afternoon of July 15, 2011. The summer heat was intense, with temperatures soaring into the mid-90s, typical for Prescott, Arizona in July. Jensen was a seasoned investigator with the Prescott Police Department, known for his methodical approach and keen attention to detail. He had seen his fair share of crime scenes, but the brutal nature of this one immediately struck him as a crime of passion. The kitchen was in chaos. Blood splattered the walls and floor, and a pool of blood surrounded Hal Griffin's lifeless body. A kitchen knife, the apparent murder weapon, lay nearby, covered in blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle, broken dishes, an overturned chair, and scattered items indicated that Hal had fought desperately for his life. Jensen carefully stepped around the evidence, noting every detail. He knew that every piece of the puzzle could be crucial in solving this case. Jensen was joined by Officer Ofelia Lopez, a young but sharp member of the team, who had a reputation for her quick thinking. Together, they began their initial assessment of the scene. Jensen noticed that the house showed no signs of forced entry, which led him to believe that Hal had known his attacker. The struggle appeared to have been contained to the kitchen, with no evidence of the fight spilling into other parts of the house. As the detectives worked, forensic technicians arrived to document the scene. They took photographs, collected samples of the blood, and dusted for fingerprints. The technicians also swabbed the knife for DNA evidence, hoping to find something that would lead them to the killer. Jensen observed as they bagged the knife and other key pieces of evidence, knowing these would be crucial in the investigation. Outside, the neighbors were beginning to gather, whispering among themselves. Prescott was a quiet town, and a murder like this was a rare and shocking event. As Jensen stepped out to speak with some of the onlookers, he was met with a mix of fear and curiosity. Many knew Hal as a friendly, easygoing man, making the violent nature of his death even more unsettling. Back inside, Jensen and Lopez continued their examination. They were particularly interested in the timeline of events. When had Hal last been seen alive, and who could have had access to the house during that time? Jensen made a mental note to interview Hal's wife, Mary, as soon as she was able to speak, knowing that her testimony could provide crucial insights. The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was clear to Jensen: this was no random act of violence. The ferocity of the attack and the lack of forced entry pointed to a killer with a personal connection to Hal, someone who had been driven by strong emotions. The task now was to uncover who that person was and why they had turned to murder. Lenny Bartholf, 60, was the first person of interest in the investigation. Lenny had been living with Hal and Mary Griffin for nearly a year under the pretense of being a down-on-his-luck friend whom Hal had taken in. In reality, Lenny was much more than a house guest. He was Hal's secret gay lover. Their relationship had been ongoing for several years, beginning back in Indiana before Hal's retirement. Lenny, a retired banker, was known for his meticulous and conservative nature. He had worked at the same bank for 40 years before retiring to Arizona. Lenny had always been a reserved and disciplined man, qualities that had served him well in his banking career. However, beneath this calm exterior, Lenny was deeply in love with Hal and harbored intense feelings of jealousy and insecurity. He had hoped that once Mary's health declined further and she succumbed to her cancer, he and Hal could be together openly. Lenny was protective of Hal, often to the point of possessiveness, and he had struggled with the knowledge that Hal had sexual relationships with other men, particularly Pete Peterson. Detective Robert Jensen and Officer Ofelia Lopez brought Lenny in for questioning on July 16, the day after Hal's body was found. The interrogation took place in a small, windowless room at the Prescott Police Department. Lenny appeared nervous but composed, his hands shaking slightly as he answered their questions. Jensen, who was known for his calm yet probing interrogation style, began by asking Lenny about his relationship with Hal. Lenny hesitated but eventually admitted to their romantic involvement, his voice cracking as he spoke. He insisted that he loved Hal deeply and would never hurt him. Jensen then asked Lenny about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Lenny claimed that he had been asleep in his room and had not heard anything unusual. However, Jensen noticed that Lenny's story had some inconsistencies. For example, Lenny couldn't explain why he hadn't heard the struggle that had clearly taken place in the kitchen, just a few rooms away. When pressed further, Lenny became agitated, raising his voice and demanding to know why he was being accused of something so horrible. The detectives also asked Lenny about his relationship with Pete Peterson, Hal's other lover. Lenny's demeanor shifted noticeably at the mention of Pete. His jealousy was evident as he spoke bitterly about Pete, accusing him of trying to come between him and Hal. Lenny's resentment towards Pete was clear, and it gave the detectives a possible motive: jealousy and fear of losing Hal. Despite Lenny's emotional responses and the inconsistencies in his story, he denied any involvement in Hal's murder. The detectives released him after several hours of questioning, but he remained a key suspect. Jensen couldn't shake the feeling that Lenny was hiding something, and he knew they needed more evidence to either prove or disprove Lenny's involvement in the crime. The second suspect in Hal Griffin's murder was his wife, Mary Griffin. At 61, Mary had once been a vibrant and active woman, known around Prescott for her involvement in local church activities and charity work. However, her life had taken a drastic turn recently after being diagnosed with brain cancer. The illness had left her weak and dependent on Hal for nearly all her daily needs. Though Mary had always been sweet-natured, the cancer had taken a toll on her memory and cognitive abilities, often leaving her confused and forgetful. Despite her illness, Mary's love for Hal was undeniable. Their marriage had transitioned to become more of a caretaker relationship, with Hal dedicating much of his time to looking after her. However, those close to the couple had noticed that Mary seemed troubled in the months leading up to Hal's death. She had moments of clarity where she appeared aware that something was amiss in her marriage, but she couldn't fully grasp the reality of Hal's secret life. Detective Robert Jensen and Officer Ophelia Lopez decided to question Mary on July 17, 2011, 2 days after Hal's body was found. They visited her at the hospital where she was being treated for the moment. A hospital was a quiet, sterile environment, far removed from the violence seen at the Griffin home. Mary was resting in bed, looking frail and tired, but she managed a weak smile when the detectives entered the room. Jensen approached the interview with care, knowing that Mary's mental state could affect her responses. He began by asking her about her relationship with Hal. Mary spoke lovingly of her husband, recalling their early years together and how he had always been there for her during her illness. She mentioned how Hal had become more distant recently, often leaving the house for long periods without explaining where he had been. However, she dismissed these thoughts, attributing them to her illness rather than anything Hal had done. The detectives then asked Mary about the night of the murder. Mary struggled to remember specific details, a common symptom of her condition. She couldn't recall hearing anything unusual that night and was genuinely shocked when she learned of Hal's death. Tears welled up in her eyes as she expressed disbelief that someone could harm the man who had cared for her so lovingly. When asked if she knew about Hal's relationships with other men, Mary seemed confused. She hesitated, then shook her head, saying that Hal had always been devoted to her. However, Jensen noted that Mary's confusion could be masking deeper emotions, perhaps a buried awareness of Hal's affairs or a fear that she wasn't the only one in his life. Despite her frail condition, Mary remained a suspect, if only because she was Hal's wife and had the closest relationship with him. However, the detectives knew that without clear evidence or a more coherent testimony, it would be difficult to build a case against her. For now, they would have to keep looking for more concrete leads. The third suspect in Hal Griffin's murder was Pete Peterson, a 56-year-old insurance adjuster who had been living in Prescott for several years. Pete was known in the community for his calm, steady demeanor and his predictable routine. He was the kind of man who enjoyed a simple, quiet life, and he was often seen at local diners like Denny's or grabbing coffee at Dutch Brothers. Pete's involvement in a sexual relationship with Hal was not well known, but those who were aware of their relationship described it as mainly being casual sex, unlike Hal's more intense connection with Lenny Bartholf. Pete had been seeing Hal for about a year, meeting discreetly for sex whenever and wherever they could. To Pete, their relationship was more about companionship and physical comfort than deep emotional ties. He knew about Lenny and even saw him as competition, but he wasn't overly concerned. Pete had pushed Hal to leave Mary and Lenny behind and start fresh with him, but Hal had always been hesitant to make such a drastic move. On July 18, 2011, 3 days after Hal's body was discovered, detectives Robert Jensen and Ophelia Lopez brought Pete in for questioning. Pete arrived at the Prescott Police Department dressed neatly, his expression calm but wary. The detectives, aware of Pete's steady personality, expected him to be cooperative, but were prepared to dig deeper if needed. Jensen began the interview by asking Pete about his relationship with Hal. Pete was upfront about their sexual involvement, describing it as casual and admitting that they had seen each other off and on for sex for about a year. He spoke in a measured tone, careful with his words, and avoided giving too much detail about their relationship. When Jensen asked if Pete had known about Lenny, Pete's face hardened slightly. He acknowledged that he knew about Lenny, but claimed he didn't see him as a serious rival. Hal was his own man, Pete said. He loved who he loved. The conversation then turned to the night of the murder. Pete explained that he had been home alone, watching television, specifically reruns of Law and Order, Special Victims Unit on USA Network, and had gone to bed early. He insisted that he hadn't seen Hal that day and that they hadn't spoken for a few days before the murder. His alibi was simple, but the detectives couldn't find anything to directly contradict it. When pressed about his feelings towards Hal and the possibility of Hal leaving him for Lenny, Pete's calm exterior began to crack. He admitted that the idea of losing Hal had upset him, but he quickly composed himself, stating that he wasn't the kind of person to act out of anger. However, Jensen noticed a flicker of emotion in Pete's eyes, something that hinted at a deeper, more complex relationship with Hal than Pete was willing to admit. After several hours of questioning, the detectives released Pete. Although he had remained mostly calm and cooperative, they were left with a sense that there was more to his story. Pete's steady demeanor, while reassuring, also made it difficult to gauge his true feelings. The detectives knew they needed to keep an eye on Pete as they continued to unravel the tangled relationships surrounding Hal Griffin's death. On July 20, 2011, 5 days after Hal Griffin's body was discovered, the Prescott Police Department received a crucial lead in the case. The day was hot and dry, typical for an Arizona summer, with temperatures hovering around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Detective Robert Jensen had just finished reviewing the initial reports when a call came in from a local hardware store, True Value, located off Gurley Street. The store manager reported that someone had found something unusual in the dumpster behind the store. Jensen and his partner, Officer Ofelio Lopez, quickly drove to the scene. The hardware store was a familiar spot in Prescott, known for its friendly service and wide selection of tools and supplies. When they arrived, the manager led them to the back of the store where the dumpsters were located. A smell of garbage and the buzz of flies filled the air as Tom pointed to a large black trash bag sitting on top of the pile. Inside the bag, Jensen and Lopez found a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. The shirt was torn and soaked with blood, clearly connected to the violent crime that had taken place in Hal Griffin's home. The gloves were made of latex, the kind commonly used for cleaning or handling chemicals, but they were also smeared with dried blood. Jensen carefully bagged the items as evidence and immediately had them sent to the crime lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, the detectives reviewed the security footage from the hardware store. Unfortunately, the camera angle didn't capture the exact spot where the bag had been dumped, but it did show a shadowy figure moving near the dumpsters late at night. The footage was grainy, and the person's identity was unclear, but it gave the detectives a timeline for when the evidence was likely discarded. A few days later, the lab results came back, confirming that the blood on the shirt and gloves matched Hal Griffin's DNA. This was a significant breakthrough in the case, suggesting that the person who dumped the bag had been directly involved in the murder. The discovery also indicated that the killer had attempted to dispose of evidence in a hurry, possibly panicking after the crime. The police now had a strong piece of evidence that could link the suspects to the crime. Jensen and Lopez knew they were closing in on the truth, but they still needed to determine who had thrown the bag into the dumpster and why. The investigation intensified as they worked to connect this new evidence to one of the suspects they had already questioned. On July 24, 2011, just over a week after Hal Griffin's body was discovered, the Prescott Police Department made a breakthrough in the case. The analysis of the blood-stained shirt and gloves found in the True Value hardware store dumpster had revealed something crucial, a partial fingerprint on one of the latex gloves. After running the print through the national database, it matched Leonard Lenny Bartholf, Hal's longtime lover. Lenny Bartholf, a 60-year-old retired banker, had been living with Hal and his wife, Mary, under the guise of being a down-and-out man Hal had taken in. In reality, Lenny and Hal had been involved in a secret sexual relationship for several years, a fact that was unknown to most people in Prescott. Lenny was deeply in love with Hal and believed that once Mary's health deteriorated, they would be together openly, but Lenny had grown increasingly paranoid about Hal's other relationships, particularly with Pete Peterson, the calm, placid insurance adjuster who had been a casual sex partner of Hal's. On the night of July 15, Lenny had confronted Hal in the kitchen of their Prescott home. Lenny had heard rumors that Hal was planning to leave him and start a new life with Pete. Fueled by jealousy and fear of losing the only person he truly loved, Lenny demanded answers. Hal, feeling cornered, admitted that he had considered leaving Prescott with Pete. This confession pushed Lenny over the edge. In a fit of rage and heartbreak, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Hal multiple times in the chest and abdomen. After the murder, Lenny panicked. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, he attempted to clean up the scene, but the mess was too overwhelming. In his haste, he grabbed the blood-stained shirt and gloves, stuffed them into a trash bag, and drove to the True Value hardware store, where he dumped the bag in the dumpster. He hoped this would cover his tracks, but the discovery of the items led the police straight to him. On the afternoon of July 24, the police arrived at the Griffin home with an arrest warrant for Lenny. He was in the backyard, tending to Mary's garden, when detectives Robert Jensen and Ofelia Lopez approached him. Lenny didn't resist arrest. He was visibly shaken but showed no surprise when they informed him of the charges. He quietly admitted to the crime, saying he hadn't meant to kill Hal but couldn't control his anger. Hal's family, particularly Mary, was devastated by the arrest. Mary, still battling brain cancer, was in shock, unable to comprehend that her husband had been living a double life and that Lenny, whom she had trusted, was his killer. The news spread quickly through Prescott, shocking the small community that had known Hal as a friendly, outgoing retiree. The arrest of Lenny Bartholf marked the beginning of the end for this tragic case. The police had pieced together the puzzle, revealing a story of love, jealousy, and betrayal that had led to a deadly outcome. But the full story would only come to light in a courtroom, where Lenny would face justice for his actions. The trial of Leonard Lenny Bartholf began on October 3, 2011, in the Yavapai County Courthouse in Prescott, Arizona. The case had garnered attention, not only because of the brutal nature of the crime, but also due to the scandalous details of Hal Griffin's secret life that had come to light. The courtroom was packed with locals eager to delve into the story of love, betrayal, and murder in this quiet retirement community. The prosecution was led by District Attorney James McLean, a seasoned lawyer known for his no-nonsense approach in the courtroom. McLean, a 58-year-old with a reputation for being tough but fair, laid out a compelling case against Lenny. He argued that Lenny's actions were premeditated, driven by jealousy and a deep fear of abandonment. McLean detailed how Lenny had lived a double life, pretending to be a homeless man taken in out of charity, while secretly maintaining a romantic relationship with Hal. He painted a picture of a man who couldn't bear the thought of losing Hal to Pete Peterson, and in a fit of rage, had murdered the very person he claimed to love. The defense, led by public defender Frankie Clark, took a different approach. Clark, a 42-year-old lawyer with a calm demeanor, argued that Lenny's actions were not premeditated, but were instead the result of a momentary lapse in control. She portrayed Lenny as a man who had been deeply in love, confused, and heartbroken by Hal's admission that he was planning to leave him. Clark emphasized Lenny's clean record, his service at the bank for 40 years, and his role as a quiet, disciplined member of society who had never shown signs of violence before this incident. She appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider the emotional turmoil that had led Lenny to commit the crime. Throughout the trial, Hal Griffin's family watched the proceedings with a mix of sadness and anger. Mary Griffin, frail and devastated, sat quietly as the details of her husband's double life were exposed to the world. The betrayal was almost as painful as the murder itself, and her emotions were evident as she listened to the arguments. After 2 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury reached a verdict. On October 17, 2011, Leonard Bartholf was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury believed that while Lenny's actions were driven by emotion, they were still deliberate and intentional. Judge Martin Harris sentenced Lenny to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected the seriousness of the crime but also took into account Lenny's previously clean record and the emotional circumstances surrounding the case. The sentence brought a sense of closure to Hal Griffin's family, though it didn't erase the pain of losing him. For Mary Griffin, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but the cost had been the shattering of the life she thought she knew. As for the Prescott community, the trial and its outcome left a lasting impact, a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, dark secrets can lead to tragic consequences. After the trial, life for those involved in the tragic events of July 2011 changed dramatically. Melanie Vela, a 20-year-old from Sherbrooke, Quebec, found herself attending the University of Virginia and working as a nanny during her summer break. This dedicated and ambitious young woman was driven by her dreams of becoming a successful lawyer. Melanie had a loving family back in Canada and was known for her kind and compassionate nature. It was the summer of 1999, and Charlottesville, Virginia was buzzing with excitement. The city was preparing for a concert at the University of Virginia's Scott Stadium. The event was highly anticipated, with fans flocking from all over the country to witness the renowned musical extravaganza. In the midst of this vibrant atmosphere, Melanie found herself employed by the wealthy Hartzfeld family. They were prominent members of the community who lived in a grand mansion on the outskirts of town, surrounded by sprawling gardens and a white picket fence. Melanie's days were filled with taking care of the Hartzfeld's child, Mei Ling, adopted from China. She would wake up early in the morning to prepare breakfast, help with school assignments, and engage in various outdoor activities. The girl adored Melanie, and she quickly became an integral part of their lives. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family, there were whispers of tension and secrets. Rumors circulated among the local gossip mill, hinting at marital discord and financial troubles within the household. As the days turned into weeks, Melanie's curiosity grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Determined to uncover the truth, she discreetly began snooping around the house, searching for any clues that might shed light on the Thompsons' hidden secrets. Little did Melanie know her quest for the truth would lead her down a dark and treacherous path, forever changing the course of her life. On the ominous afternoon of June 2, 1999, the quiet town of Charlottesville, Virginia, was shrouded in an atmosphere of unease. Dark clouds ominously loomed overhead, mirroring the impending tragedy that was about to unfold. As the day wore on, tension mounted within the Hartzfeld residence. The once peaceful home now held a sinister secret, unbeknownst to Melanie Vela, a diligent and driven 20-year-old student from Sherbrooke, Quebec, who had been working as a nanny for the affluent Hartzfeld family during her summer break from the University of Virginia. Little did she know that her life was about to take a tragic turn, forever altering the lives of those around her. It was in the dimly lit basement of the Hartzfeld family's opulent mansion that Melanie's lifeless body was discovered. The shocking find was made by Jane La Salvador, a Brazilian maid employed by the family. Startled and trembling, Janela wasted no time in alerting the authorities, her voice quivering with fear as she recounted the horrifying scene she had stumbled upon. Gossip about Melanie's untimely demise spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of Charlottesville. As the investigation unfolded, details would emerge. The basement, once a place of storage and solace, had become a haunting crime scene. The authorities meticulously combed through the area, searching for any clues that would shed light on the events leading to Melanie's tragic demise. In this small town, where everyone seemed to know each other, the tragic death of Melanie Vela shattered the illusion of safety. The once peaceful streets now felt haunted as the community grappled with the chilling reality that a dark secret had been lurking within their midst. On June 2, 1999, Charlottesville, Virginia, a city usually steeped in the idyllic charm of Southern history and academia, was rocked by a grisly discovery. In the basement of a stately home on the prestigious Maplewood Drive, the lifeless body of Melanie Vela, a 20-year-old University of Virginia student and part-time nanny, was found. The scene was one of unmitigated horror. Vela had been savagely murdered, her throat slit in a violent act that left the community reeling. The Charlottesville Police Department, led by seasoned detectives Smith and Ramirez, descended upon the Hartzfeld residence with a sense of urgency that matched the gravity of the crime. The family, prominent in local academic circles, was now at the center of a murder investigation that would grip the city for months to come. As the detectives navigated the blood-spattered basement, the evidence of a struggle was undeniable. Amidst the chaos, a picture of the victim began to emerge. Vela, known for her academic ambition and compassionate nature, had been living a double life with members of the Hartzfeld family. As the investigation unfolded, local media outlets like the Daily Progress and Duty Ina Radio provided coverage, drawing parallels to the infamous Ramsey case that had captivated the nation just a few years prior. The community, still reeling from the shock, could hardly believe that such a crime could occur in their midst, in a city where the biggest concerns were often which historical tour to take or whether the Cavaliers would win their next game. The case of Melanie Vela, with its blend of academic prestige and sordid secrets, would become a fixture in the annals of true crime in Charlottesville, a stark reminder that no place, no matter how picturesque, is immune to the darker aspects of human nature. In the quiet college town of Charlottesville, Virginia, a scandalous liaison turned deadly when Melanie Vela, a 20-year-old University of Virginia student, was found murdered. The prime suspect, James Hartzfeld, a 44-year-old physics professor renowned for his academic prowess, but now under scrutiny for his clandestine affairs. Hartzfeld, who had been nurturing a secret sexual relationship with Varela while she nannied his adopted daughter, Mei Ling, became the focal point of a sensational investigation. As detectives delved into the professor's private life, they uncovered a web of deceit that extended far beyond the ivy-covered walls of academia. The case, which unfolded in the summer of 1999, captivated the nation. It was a time when the world was gripped by the fear of the impending Y2K bug, and the media was still reeling from the sensational coverage of the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. Amidst this backdrop, the Hartzfeld case emerged as a stark reminder of the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic university life. Detectives Smith and Ramirez, seasoned investigators with the Charlottesville Police Department, interrogated Hartzfeld with a calculated intensity. They probed his alibis, dissected his interactions with Varela, and scrutinized every facet of his personal life. Hartzfeld's reactions, a volatile cocktail of anger and denial, only served to heighten suspicions. As the interrogation wore on, the evidence against Hartzfeld mounted. A torn ticket stub from the hit movie The Matrix hinted at a premeditated alibi, and whispers of Hartzfeld's affinity for the then-popular Tommy Hilfiger Hager painted a picture of a man caught between the facade of respectability and the allure of forbidden pleasures. The case against James Hartzfeld was quickly becoming irrefutable, and the once-respected professor found himself ensnared in a narrative that seemed straight out of a Dateline mystery. As the investigation continued, the question on everyone's mind was whether justice would be served in the court of law or if the court of public opinion had already sealed Hartzfeld's fate. In the serene town of Charlottesville, a veneer of tranquility was shattered by a heinous crime that gripped the community. Paula Hartzfeld, a prominent figure in the literary circles of Charlottesville, Virginia, found herself entangled in a scandalous investigation following the brutal murder of Melanie Vela, a young manny employed by the Hartzfeld family. Paula, known for her erudite literary symposiums that often featured esteemed authors and captivated Charlottesville's intellectual elite, seemed an unlikely participant in such a sordid affair. Yet beneath the surface of her cultivated exterior, a different narrative was unfolding, one that would challenge the public's perception of her. The police, delving into the intricacies of Melanie's life, uncovered a clandestine sexual relationship between Paula and the victim. This revelation came as a shock to those who knew Paula as the wife of James Hartzfeld, a respected physics professor, and the mother to Mei Ling, their adopted daughter from China. During the interrogation, Paula's composure wavered under the weight of the detectives' probing questions. Her unease was palpable, her answers laced with defensiveness. The detectives, seasoned in the art of discernment, noted the subtle shifts in her demeanor, her fleeting glances, the nervous tapping of her fingers, and the inconsistency in her recounting of the events leading up to Melanie's death. As the investigation deepened, the media frenzy intensified. Local news outlets like the Daily Progress began to speculate on the dynamics within the Hartzfeld household. The community watched, riveted, as the case unfolded, bearing witness to a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on the town's history. The scrutiny of Paula Hartzfeld's role in this grim saga continued, with the authorities piecing together a timeline that suggested a motive rooted in jealousy and betrayal. The question on everyone's mind: could a woman of Paula's stature be capable of such a crime? Or was there more to the story than met the eye? In the investigation of Melanie Varela's murder, a pivotal discovery was made that would cast a new light on the case. The Charlottesville Police Department, in a meticulous search of the Hartzfeld residence, uncovered a diary belonging to the victim. This personal journal, filled with sexually explicit details and confessions, became a key piece of evidence, revealing the complex web of relationships Melanie had entwined with each member of the Hartzfeld family. The diary entries painted a vivid picture of Melanie's life and her interactions with each member of the family. It chronicled her secret sexual liaisons and the emotional turmoil that accompanied them. The police, combing through the pages, found references to clandestine meetings, sexual acts, and a growing sense of fear as Melanie became aware of the precariousness of her situation. Detectives Smith and Ramirez, leading the investigation, approached the diary with the precision of forensic analysts. They cross-referenced dates, events, and encounters, corroborating the diary's accounts with other collected evidence. The diary's revelations were damning, implicating not just one, but all members of the Hartzfeld family in a sordid saga of manipulation and deceit. The media, including local outlets like WVIR-NBC 29, were quick to pick up on the story. The diary's contents became fodder for speculation and analysis as reporters dissected its entries, seeking to understand the motives behind the murder. As the diary's secrets unfolded, the community of Charlottesville watched in disbelief. The University of Virginia, an institution known for its honor code and academic integrity, was now at the center of a scandal that defied comprehension. The Hartzfeld family, once respected members of the academic and literary community, were now suspects in a crime that had shattered the peace of this quiet college town. The investigation into the brutal murder of Melanie Vela took a dramatic turn as attention shifted to Kevin Hartzfeld, the 22-year-old son of James and Paula Hartzfeld. A recent graduate from the University of Virginia, Kevin's involvement with Melanie was as complex as it was secretive. Detectives Smith and Ramirez, experienced in the psychological nuances of interrogation, sat across from Kevin in the sterile room at the Charlottesville Police Department. The air was thick with tension as they began their questioning, seeking to peel back the layers of Kevin's relationship with Melanie. Kevin, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, oscillated between anger and palpable fear. His voice, when he spoke, betrayed the turmoil within. The detectives pressed on, their questions sharp and unyielding, cutting to the heart of the matter. They probed for details about his illicit affair with Melanie, an affair that had been kept hidden from the prying eyes of the public. The interrogation revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. Kevin, like his parents, had been ensnared in a web of sexual deceit with Melanie. The police uncovered evidence of their sexual encounters, each one meticulously documented in a perverse scorecard the family maintained. The Hartzfeld residence, once a symbol of academic achievement and cultural sophistication, was now the epicenter of a scandalous murder investigation. The family's dark secret, once confined to the pages of Melanie's diary, was now laid bare for the world to see. With each passing moment, the walls closed in on Kevin Hartzfeld. The evidence mounted, and the reality of his situation became increasingly clear. The young man, who had once walked the halls of academia with pride, now faced the possibility of a life behind bars. In the quiet college town of Charlottesville, Virginia, a sinister plot unraveled within the walls of the Hartzfeld home, culminating in the tragic demise of Melanie Vela. The investigation into her murder took a dramatic turn when detectives uncovered the involvement of not one, but all three members of the Hartzfeld family. James Hartzfeld, a respected physics professor, his wife Paula, known for her literary gatherings, and their son Kevin, a recent college graduate, were all implicated in the crime. The trio had been entangled in a web of illicit sexual relationships with Melanie, each seeking to have secret sex with her in turn. Their clandestine sex was meticulously recorded in a scorecard of their sexual encounters with her, a chilling testament to the twisted sexual competition that had developed among them. The discovery of this scorecard was a pivotal moment in the case, as it exposed the lengths to which the Hartzfelds would go to maintain their facade of normalcy. Each point on the scorecard represented a sexual encounter with Melanie, reducing her to a mere object in their grotesque sex game. It was this dehumanizing treatment that ultimately led to her silence, permanently. As the community of Charlottesville grappled with the shock of such a heinous act occurring in their midst, the public watched in horror as the details of the case were laid bare, from the bloodstains in the basement to the disturbing entries in Melanie's diary. The Hartzfelds' motive was clear: to protect their secret at all costs. Their fear of exposure drove them to conspire against Melanie, leading to a brutal act of violence that would end her life and shatter the tranquility of Charlottesville. As the trial approached, legal experts weighed in on the case, speculating on the outcome and the potential sentences. The Hartzfelds faced the possibility of life in prison, a stark contrast to their previous lives of prestige and privilege. The case served as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors, even in the most seemingly idyllic of settings. The police, after a meticulous investigation, pieced together the evidence that pointed unequivocally to the family's guilt in the murder of Melanie Vela. The day of reckoning came when law enforcement officials, armed with irrefutable proof, arrested James, Paula, and Kevin Hartzfeld. The scene was one of stark reality, as the family, once respected members of the community, were handcuffed and taken into custody. The surprise and resignation on their faces were palpable, a stark contrast to their previous academic and social standing. As the news of the arrest spread, local media outlets prepared to broadcast the story, drawing parallels to other infamous family crime sagas. The coverage was thorough, with journalists providing in-depth analysis of the case's impact on the small Virginia town. The victim's family, who had held on to hope from their home in Sherbrooke, Quebec, were now faced with a mix of relief and sorrow. The truth brought closure, but also a deep sense of loss for Melanie, whose aspirations and kindness were remembered by all who knew her. In the solemn halls of the Charlottesville courthouse, the trial of the Hartzfeld family unfolded like a narrative ripped from the pages of a crime thriller, capturing the rapt attention of the area, ensuring that not a single detail of the proceedings would escape the public eye. District Attorney Tina Arundel, known for her prosecutorial acumen, presented the case against the Hartzfelds with precision and clarity. The courtroom hummed on every word as she recounted the sordid details of the relationships between Melanie Vela and each member of the family, painting a picture of a household ensnared in its own web of deceit. Defense attorney Anne-Marie Gooseneck, renowned for her tenacious courtroom strategies, mounted a vigorous defense. She challenged the prosecution's narrative, suggesting that the evidence was circumstantial and the investigation flawed. Her arguments were crafted to sow doubt in the minds of the jurors, but the weight of the evidence was formidable. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the discovery of Melanie's diary, which became the silent witness to the tragedy. It revealed the intimate and exploitative nature of her relationships with James, Paula, and Kevin Hartzfeld, and the existence of a macabre scorecard that documented their encounters. As the trial progressed, the media coverage intensified. Local news outlets like WVIR-NBC 29 featured nightly segments, dissecting each day's testimony and offering expert legal analysis. The case had all the elements of a primetime drama: passion, betrayal, and a quest for justice. The victim's family, who had traveled from Sherbrooke, Quebec, sat in dignified grief, their presence a constant reminder of the life so brutally taken. They listened intently as the prosecution spoke of Melanie's aspirations and her vibrant spirit, now forever silenced. After days of testimony and deliberation, the moment of truth arrived. The jury, having weighed the evidence, found the Hartzfelds guilty on all counts. The sentence was swift and severe, reflecting the gravity of their crimes. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of emotion as the verdict was read. The trial's conclusion brought closure to some, but for others, questions lingered. Had justice been served? Could anything compensate for the loss of a young woman with such promise? The Hartzfeld case would remain a topic of discussion in law schools, on social media platforms like Twitter, and in the quiet conversations of those who call Charlottesville home. As the gavel struck for the last time, the case of Melanie Vela closed, leaving behind a legacy of cautionary tales about the dangers of secrets and the pursuit of truth. The trial, a stark tableau of the consequences of unchecked desire and duplicity, left an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. The aftermath of the Hartzfeld trial left an indelible mark on the community of Charlottesville. The once respected family faced the stark reality of their actions, as the gavel's final echo signified the end of their saga of a world where the pursuit of truth met the darkest human deeds. The police, lauded for their unwavering dedication, continued to serve as guardians of justice, their resolve strengthened by the case's outcome. The victim's family, hailing from the serene town of Sherbrooke, Quebec, embarked on a painful journey toward healing, their quest for closure intertwined with the memory of Melanie's vibrant life and tragic end. As the Hartzfelds began their sentences, the ripple effects of the trial extended beyond the courtroom. In Charlottesville, life slowly resumed its rhythm, but the shadows cast by the trial lingered. The case became a fixture in the town's lore, a cautionary tale of how secrets can unravel the fabric of a family and a community. The story of Melanie Vela, and the Hartzfelds would not be forgotten, serving as a somber reminder of the fragility of trust and the price of deception. The case of Melanie Vela's murder sent shockwaves through Charlottesville, Virginia, in June of 1999. This true crime story exposed the depths of human deception and the tragic consequences that ensued. In the suburban tranquility of Rochester, New York, Vanessa Robertson, age 46, lived the life emblematic of the American dream. A dedicated mother of 3 and a valued filing clerk at the iconic photography company Kodak, Vanessa's life was one interwoven with the fabric of her community. Nestled in a 4-bedroom home on a street lined with similar manifestations of middle-class aspiration, she was a figure of constancy and warmth. Vanessa's educational journey culminated with a degree from the University of Rochester, an institution renowned for its contribution to research and academia. It was here that she not only honed her professional skills but also met her husband, Andrew, forging the beginnings of their shared future. The world outside her home was in the throes of change. The news cycle of March 2010 was dominated by the Affordable Care Act debates, and the tremors of the Great Recession were still palpable in households and boardrooms alike. Kodak, once a titan of industry, was grappling with the digital revolution, its struggles an echo of the wider economic uncertainty. Despite the tumult, Vanessa's focus remained on the immediate joys and challenges of life. Her eldest was preparing for college, her middle child was navigating the throes of adolescence, and her youngest was on the cusp of celebrating her 10th birthday. Vanessa poured her dreams into her children's futures, envisioning for them a world of possibilities that perhaps she had never dared to imagine for herself. Colleagues at Kodak described Vanessa as diligent and personable, a woman who brought order to the chaos of filing with a smile that seldom waned. Friends spoke of her as the linchpin of her family, a woman whose laughter could light up a room and whose presence was a comfort in uncertain times. In the days before her untimely death, Vanessa was absorbed in the minutiae of life, from planning her daughter's birthday party to navigating the everyday demands of her job. Unbeknownst to her, the threads of her carefully woven tapestry were about to unravel in the most tragic of circumstances. On the cold morning of March 15, 2010, as Rochester residents awoke to the remnants of a winter chill, a grim discovery was made in a quiet neighborhood. At 7:30 a.m., under a slate-gray sky, the smoldering remains of what was once a family home on Maplewood Drive were found. The house, belonging to Vanessa Robertson, a 46-year-old Kodak employee, had been reduced to a blackened shell. The distressing find was made by Diana Hastings, a neighbor and longtime resident of the area. Diana, who had set out to collect her morning newspaper, was met with an acrid smell and a scene of destruction that halted her in her tracks. The Robertson residence, known for its well-kept lawn and the laughter of children, lay in ruins before her. With shaking hands, she reached for her cell phone and dialed 911, her voice quivering as she reported the catastrophe to the authorities. As news of the fire began to spread, local media outlets picked up the story, interrupting regular programming with breaking news alerts. The tragedy quickly became the talk of the town, overshadowing the usual buzz about the upcoming St. Patrick's Day celebrations and the latest reports on the health care bill making its way through Congress. Firefighters, who had battled the blaze through the night, were still on the scene, dousing the last of the smoldering embers when police arrived. It was amid this backdrop of charred timbers and the stark reality of a life interrupted that Vanessa's body was discovered. Positioned in what was once the living room, her remains bore the silent testimony to the inferno's deadly force. The community, just beginning its day, was now united in shock and mourning. The Robertsons, active members of their local church and participants in neighborhood gatherings, were well regarded, and Vanessa's death resonated with a poignant intensity. As the reality of the tragedy set in, the question on everyone's lips was whispered: how could this happen? The Rochester Police Department was swift to respond to the call from Maplewood Drive on that bleak March morning. The first officers arrived within minutes, their squad cars breaking the early silence. The scene they encountered was one of devastation. A family home, once a symbol of suburban stability, now lay in ruins, a stark contrast to the neighboring houses untouched by the tragedy. Detectives Matthew Harmon and Liana Grace, veterans of the force, were tasked with leading the investigation. They approached the scene with a practiced calm, but the gravity of the situation was not lost on them. The air was still tinged with the scent of smoke, and the debris from the fire crunched underfoot as they surveyed the damage. The crime scene was a harrowing tableau. Amidst the blackened remains of the Robertson home, Vanessa's body was found. There were no overt signs of violence, but the circumstances were suspicious enough to consider foul play. The detectives, well-versed in the grim language of crime scenes, noted the absence of personal effects that might have survived the fire, raising questions about the intensity and origin of the flames. As they cordoned off the area, Harmon and Grace directed the forensics team to begin their meticulous work. Using the latest in crime scene technology, including thermal imaging cameras to detect any residual heat sources and accelerant-sniffing dogs to trace the path of the fire, the team combed through the ashes. Every fragment was potential evidence, every clue a possible key to unraveling the mystery of Vanessa Robertson's death. The local media, already abuzz with the healthcare debates and the international headlines of Chile's recent earthquake, now had a domestic tragedy to report. Camera crews and reporters gathered at the perimeter, their lenses and microphones capturing the somber investigation for an audience grappling with the shock of the event. As the day wore on, the community awaited answers. The Rochester Police Department was under pressure to piece together the puzzle of the house fire that had claimed one of their own. For Detectives Harmon and Grace, the task was clear: to bring clarity and justice to a scene shrouded in ash and ambiguity. The investigation into Vanessa Robertson's death led detectives to the doorstep of the first suspect, Elzar Jones. At 75, Jones was a fixture in the community, known for his stern demeanor and his sprawling farmland that bordered the Robertson property. A property dispute between Jones and the Robertsons had been simmering for months, a fact that did not escape the attention of the Rochester Police Department. Elzar Jones had lived through the ebbs and flows of rural life and had seen his share of conflict over land and legacy. His farm, a once thriving enterprise, had felt the sting of the Great Recession, and the dispute with the Robertsons over a contested piece of borderland had added to the weight of his troubles. Despite his advancing years, Jones harbored dreams of leaving a prosperous and unencumbered farm to his heirs, a dream that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. When detectives Harmon and Grace arrived to question him, they found Jones in his barn, tending to his equipment, seemingly unfazed by the police presence. His response to their inquiries was laced with indignation. He vehemently denied any involvement in the fire, his voice rising above the clatter of the news reports from a radio perched on a nearby workbench, the voice of a local anchor discussing the latest unemployment figures. A stark reminder of the tense economic climate, Jones's interrogation was conducted with the precision of seasoned investigators. They probed for inconsistencies in his alibi, scrutinized his reactions, and searched for any flicker of guilt that might betray complicity. Jones, for his part, remained obstinate, his replies a mixture of defiance and exasperation. The detectives left the farm with more questions than answers. The Rochester community, still reeling from the news of the fire and the death of one of their own, watched with a mix of curiosity and concern. The investigation was unfolding under the watchful eye of a town unaccustomed to such tragedies, and the spotlight on Elzar Jones was unrelenting. As the investigation into the tragic fire progressed, detectives turned their focus to Kristen Vmont, a 35-year-old colleague of Vanessa Robertson at Kodak. Vmont, known for her ambitious streak within the company, had reportedly clashed with Vanessa on multiple occasions, leading to a palpable tension in the office that did not go unnoticed by their coworkers. Kristen had joined Kodak during a time of significant transition as the company struggled to adapt to the digital age in the wake of declining film sales, a struggle mirrored in news reports and business analyses of the time. Her aspirations to ascend the corporate ladder were well known, and she envisioned herself as a transformative figure within the company, capable of steering Kodak back to its former glory. Detectives Harmon and Grace approached the interrogation with a methodical strategy, aware of the delicate nature of office politics and the undercurrent of rivalry that could potentially motivate a crime. They questioned Kristen at the police station, where she presented herself with a composed exterior that belied the seriousness of the situation. Throughout the questioning, Kristen maintained her calm, her responses measured and deliberate. She acknowledged her professional disagreements with Vanessa, but firmly denied any personal animosity that would lead to such a heinous act. Her demeanor was cool and collected, even as the detectives pressed her on the details of her whereabouts on the night of the fire. The Rochester community, still processing the loss of one of their own, followed the case with growing interest. Local media outlets, in between updates on the latest iPad release and the unfolding healthcare debate in Washington, kept the public informed of every development. The scrutiny on Kristen Vmont intensified as the police continued to piece together the events leading up to the fire, her professional dreams and ambitions now cast in the shadow of a criminal investigation. On March 20, 2010, as the city of Rochester braced against a persistent spring drizzle, the investigation into Vanessa Robertson's death took a significant turn. Detectives Harmon and Grace received a report that breathed new life into the case. A series of anonymous, threatening emails sent to Vanessa in the weeks prior to her death had been uncovered by the department's cybercrime unit. The emails, traced back to an untraceable source, were laced with vitriol and menacing undertones, digital missives that painted a picture of someone with a vendetta against Vanessa. The discovery of these emails shifted the narrative of the investigation, suggesting that the fire might have been a premeditated act of violence rather than a tragic accident. The Rochester Police Department's response was swift and methodical. The forensics team, equipped with advanced software used to analyze digital communications, worked tirelessly to extract any metadata that might lead to the identification of the sender. Meanwhile, detectives revisited the charred remnants of the Robertson home, searching for any physical evidence that might corroborate the digital threats. The news of the threatening emails rippled through the community, which was already grappling with the economic anxieties of the time, the whispers of Kodak's financial troubles, and the broader implications of the ongoing recession. The case, with its new twist, was now the subject of fervent discussion on local radio shows and in the comment sections of online news articles, as residents of Rochester sought to make sense of the unfolding drama. As the investigation pressed forward, the police remained tight-lipped about their findings, though it was clear that the discovery of the emails had provided a new avenue of inquiry. The Rochester community watched on, hopeful that this latest development would bring them closer to understanding the events that led to the tragic loss of Vanessa Robertson. The Rochester Police Department's search for Vanessa Robertson's killer led them to a third individual of interest, George Stanovich, a 45-year-old ex-convict whose presence had been noted in the vicinity of the Robertson residence in the days preceding the fire. Stanovich, with a past marred by criminal activity, had been attempting to reintegrate into society, holding on to the dream of leaving his checkered history behind him. Stanovich's occupation since his release from prison had been sporadic, with him taking on various odd jobs around Rochester. His transient nature and proximity to the Robertsons' home during the critical time frame made him a figure of suspicion in the eyes of the detectives. Stanovich's aspirations for a normal life, free from the stigma of his past, were now overshadowed by the investigation. Detectives Harmon and Grace approached the interrogation with the intent to peel back the layers of Stanovich's recent activities. The questioning took place against the backdrop of a city still in shock, with local news outlets like WROC-TV and The Democrat and Chronicle closely following the case, providing the public with a steady stream of updates amidst their coverage of the healthcare bill's progress and the local impact of the economic downturn. During the interrogation, Stanovich's demeanor oscillated between anxious and defensive. He acknowledged his presence in the area but claimed it was innocuous, related to a potential job opportunity. His responses were tinged with the frustration of a man familiar with being on the wrong side of the law, yet he maintained his innocence regarding the fire and Vanessa's death. The Rochester community, already on edge from the recession's impact on local industry giants like Xerox and Bosch and Lohm, watched as the police delved deeper into Stanovich's alibi. With each passing day, the pressure mounted to solve the case and provide answers to a family and a city in mourning. The relentless pursuit of truth by the Rochester Police Department culminated in a revelation that would shake the foundations of the Robertson family and the community at large. Andrew Robertson, a 48-year-old engineer at Kodak and the bereaved husband of Vanessa Robertson, emerged as the prime suspect in the case. The economic strain of the Great Recession had left Andrew facing the prospect of unemployment, as Kodak, once a bastion of innovation and prosperity, was now grappling with the seismic shifts of the digital age. Andrew, described by colleagues as a pragmatic man deeply invested in his work, had been harboring a secret that would unravel his seemingly stable life. With Kodak's layoffs making headlines and the financial security of families across Rochester hanging in the balance, Andrew had been silently drowning in desperation. His dream of maintaining the comfortable life he had built for his family was slipping away, and in a moment of profound misjudgment, he set his home ablaze, intending to claim the insurance without his wife's knowledge. On that fateful March evening, as the city contended with the chill of early spring and the local news reported on the burgeoning Tea Party movement's rallies, Andrew had not realized that Vanessa would be home. The fire, intended as a desperate escape from financial ruin, instead became an act of unintended but irreversible devastation. Detectives Harmon and Grace, after painstakingly reconstructing the sequence of events and analyzing the evidence, confronted Andrew with their findings. His facade of stoicism crumbled as the implications of his actions became clear. The man who had sought to protect his family from economic hardship had instead torn it asunder. As the news of Andrew's arrest spread through Rochester, the city was left to grapple with the dichotomy of a man who was both a respected engineer and now a convicted murderer. The case, a stark reminder of the pressures that can fracture even the most ordinary lives, became a touchstone for discussions on the far-reaching effects of the recession. On the evening of March 25, 2010, under the dimming light of an overcast sky, the Rochester Police Department made a decisive move in the case of Vanessa Robertson. Andrew Robertson, a 48-year-old Kodak engineer and the unsuspecting husband-turned-suspect, was taken into custody. The city, still grappling with the economic anxieties of the recession and the uncertainty surrounding local stalwarts like Kodak, now witnessed the dramatic turn in a case that had captivated the community. The arrest occurred at Andrew's temporary residence, a modest hotel room he had retreated to amidst the investigation. Detectives Harmon and Grace, armed with evidence of his ill-fated attempt to escape financial ruin, approached with a warrant. The scene was far removed from the technological advancements and corporate strategies discussed in Kodak's boardrooms or the latest healthcare debates that dominated the airwaves. Andrew's reaction to the arrest was a complex tapestry of emotions. Surprise registered on his face, quickly followed by the dawning realization of the consequences of his actions. The man who had engineered a desperate plan to secure his family's future through an act of arson was now confronted with the irreversible outcome of his wife's death. As the news of the arrest broke, it rippled through Rochester's local media, with reporters from stations like Wham and WGC providing live updates. Breaking into scheduled programming that included March Madness basketball and the latest episodes of popular TV shows. The community, which had been following the case with bated breath, now grappled with the reality that the tragedy was rooted not in random violence but in a domestic spiral gone horribly wrong. The Robertson children, already facing the loss of their mother, were dealt another blow with the arrest of their father. The family's grief was compounded by a sense of betrayal, their private turmoil laid bare for all to see. As the details of the case unfolded, the city of Rochester bore witness to a family's heartbreak and the downfall of a man who had succumbed to the darkest reaches of despair. The trial of Andrew Robertson commenced amidst a climate of heightened public interest. The courtroom, a stage for the unfolding drama, was presided over by a sea of legal professionals, media personnel, and a community seeking closure. Helen Pierce, the prosecutor, stood as a figure of relentless justice. At 52, her reputation was that of a formidable presence in the courtroom, having navigated numerous high-profile cases with a blend of legal acumen and unwavering resolve. On the opposing side, defense attorney Sheila Keller, 47, was known for her persuasive oratory and empathetic approach to the law. Keller's task was to humanize Andrew, to cast him as a tragic figure overwhelmed by the economic pressures that had seized the nation, much like the recession's grip on Rochester's own corporate giants, Kodak and Xerox. As Pierce laid out the prosecution's case, she weaved a narrative of premeditated arson, a desperate act by a man on the brink. She referenced the digital evidence, the financial strains, and the insurance policy that pointed to a motive rooted in economic despair. The courtroom, filled with the hum of whispered speculation, was a microcosm of the wider world, where news cycles were dominated by stories of financial ruin and corporate bailouts. Keller's defense painted a different picture, that of a man who had made a catastrophic error in judgment, without malice or intent to harm his beloved wife. She highlighted Andrew's role as a provider, a man caught in an economic maelstrom that had left him floundering. Throughout the proceedings, the emotional toll on Vanessa's family was palpable. They sat, a portrait of sorrow, their presence a silent testimony to the life that had been so abruptly taken from them. The trial, unfolding under the scrutiny of local media outlets like the Democrat and Chronicle, became a somber reflection of the times, a narrative of personal tragedy against the backdrop of national economic hardship. The somber atmosphere of the Rochester courthouse was palpable as the jury returned with their verdict for Andrew Robertson. After hours of deliberation, which seemed to echo the broader societal deliberations on justice and economic hardship, the jury found Andrew guilty of manslaughter and arson. The decision reverberated through the courtroom, where the tension had been as thick as the March fog blanketing the city's skyline. Prosecutor Helen Pierce, her career marked by a string of successful convictions, stood satisfied with the outcome, believing justice had been served. The defense attorney, Sheila Keller, known for her eloquent defenses and a personal touch that often resonated with juries, was visibly subdued, his expression reflecting the weight of the verdict. The sentencing phase brought a heavy penalty as the judge, attuned to the severity of the crime and its repercussions, imposed a lengthy prison sentence. The gravity of the sentence sought to reflect not only the loss of Vanessa's life, but also the betrayal of trust and the breach of safety within the sanctity of one's home. Some in the community felt the punishment was just, considering the deliberate act of setting the fire, while others debated the role of Andrew's desperate financial circumstances, drawing parallels to the leniency shown in some corporate bailouts of the era. The impact of the sentence on Vanessa's family was complex. While some felt a measure of relief, others questioned whether any sentence could adequately address the void left behind. Friends and family, their emotions raw, were divided on whether justice had truly been served. Local news outlets, which have been following the case with the same intensity as the national coverage of the iPad's release earlier that month, now reported on the community's reaction. The sentencing was more than a legal conclusion. It was a moment of reflection on the personal cost of the economic downturn that had swept through Rochester and the nation. In the wake of the trial that had gripped Rochester, life slowly began to move forward. The family of Vanessa Robertson, now navigating a world without her, sought solace in the support of the community and in each other. The children, bereft of both parents, faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives, their resilience a testament to their mother's enduring influence. Detectives Harmon and Grace, who had become fixtures in the media narrative surrounding the case, returned to their duties. The experience, however, left an indelible mark on their careers. They continued to serve with a renewed understanding of the complexities of human behavior and the unforeseen impacts of financial despair. The suspects who had been drawn into the case, Elzar Jones, Kristen Vmont, and George Stanovich, sought to reclaim their reputations and move past the cloud of suspicion that had briefly overshadowed their lives. Jones returned to his farm, Vmont to her ambitions at Kodak, and Stanovich to his quest for redemption. Rochester itself, a city that had witnessed the rise and fall of industrial giants, the ebb and flow of economic fortunes, and now the tragic end of one of its own, continued to evolve. The case had become a part of its history, a story recounted in the pages of the Democrat and Chronicle and discussed in the quiet corners of local establishments. As the memory of the trial faded from the headlines, overtaken by coverage of the 2010 midterm elections or the latest advancements from companies like Apple, the community did not forget the lessons learned. The tragedy of Vanessa Robertson served as a stark reminder of the human cost of economic hardship, a narrative that resonated in the collective consciousness of a city all too familiar with change. Life after the trial was not just about moving on, it was about remembering and finding meaning in the aftermath of loss. For all those touched by the case, the journey forward was one paved with reflection, resilience, and a hope for a future free from such heartbreak. The case of Vanessa Robertson is a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the unforeseen consequences of desperation. In the quiet suburb of Rochester, a family was torn asunder, and a community was left to find healing in the aftermath of a tragedy that was as senseless as it was sorrowful. In the heart of Orlando, Florida, during the hot summer of July 2011, lived Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie, both 44, with their 3 children. Their life was not what most would consider typical. Evan served the community as a Unitarian minister, known for his engaging sermons and compassionate nature. Danielle, who was also a Unitarian minister, was a woman of ambition and adventure, always seeking new experiences. The Shaun Essies were advocates for an open marriage, a lifestyle choice where partners agree it's acceptable to have sexual relationships outside of their marriage. This was symbolized by an upside-down pineapple sticker on their SUV, a symbol of the swinger lifestyle. They were open and proud of their lifestyle, hoping to foster a community built on the principles of sex and love without restrictions and acceptance of different ways of living. They were featured in a 2010 documentary called Love Unlimited: Polyamory in America, where they shared their experiences and beliefs about non-monogamy. They also ran a blog where they discussed topics such as spirituality, sexuality, and social justice. Their views on love and relationships made them stand out in Orlando, a city buzzing with life due to its attractions like Disney World and Universal Studios, which were drawing crowds eager to experience the new wizarding world of Harry Potter that had opened the previous year. Amidst this backdrop of fantasy and excitement, the Shaun Essies pursued their dream of a progressive community. However, their unconventional life was not without its challenges. Evan and Danielle navigated the complexities of their open marriage while juggling responsibilities as parents and professionals. They were determined to live authentically, despite societal norms that often clashed with their values. As July 2011 unfolded, the Shaun Essies found themselves at a crossroads, their lives entangled in a web of love, betrayal, and addiction. Their story is a stark reminder of the delicate balance between freedom and responsibility and the unforeseen consequences that can arise from pushing the boundaries of sexual relationships. On the evening of July 15, 2011, a horrific crime shattered the peace and tranquility of a suburban neighborhood in Orlando, Florida. The Shaun Essie family, known for their progressive and unconventional lifestyle, became the victims of a brutal and senseless murder. Their bodies were discovered by their 15-year-old daughter, Caitlyn, who had just returned from a summer camp in North Carolina. She was greeted by a nightmarish scene of blood and carnage. As she walked into the living room, she was greeted by a scene of unimaginable horror. There, on the floor, lay the naked bodies of her parents, covered in blood and stab wounds. They had been viciously attacked by an unknown assailant who had inflicted multiple injuries on their chests, necks, and faces. The living room was a bloody mess, with furniture overturned and blood spattered on the walls and carpet. Caitlyn was overcome with shock and terror as she realized that her parents were dead. She immediately called 911, sobbing and screaming for help. Her frantic voice was recorded by the dispatcher, who tried to calm her down and get more information. "My parents are dead. They're dead. There's blood everywhere. Please, 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 help me," Caitlyn cried. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late to save the victims. Caitlyn was taken to a nearby hospital, where she was treated for shock and trauma. She was later placed in the care of her aunt, who flew in from New York. The brutal slaying of the Shaun Essie couple sent shockwave through the Orlando community, especially among their friends and fellow members of the First Unitarian Church of Orlando. The couple, who had been married for 20 years, were described by their friends and family as loving, compassionate, and adventurous people who wanted to create a more inclusive and accepting world. They had no known enemies or conflicts, which made their murder even more baffling and disturbing. Who would want to kill them, and why? These were the questions that haunted the investigators, who would face a complex and challenging case. Within minutes of receiving the frantic 911 call on July 15, 2011 from Caitlyn Shaun Essie, the Orlando Police Department dispatched a team of officers to the scene of the crime. The Shaun Essie home, located in the affluent Baldwin Park neighborhood, was cordoned off as a potential homicide site. The first responders, led by Detective Eugene Domingo, entered the house with caution, unsure of what they would find inside. What they witnessed was a scene of unimaginable horror. The living room, decorated with modern furniture and colorful artwork, was soaked with blood, the furniture overturned. On the floor, the corpses of Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie lay naked, their bodies riddled with multiple stab wounds. The couple, who had been married for 20 years, had been brutally murdered in their own home. The police quickly assessed the situation and called for backup and medical assistance. They also tried to comfort Caitlyn, who was in a state of shock and trauma. She was taken to the Orlando Regional Medical Center, where she was treated for minor injuries and psychological distress. She was later joined by her aunt, who flew in from New York to take care of her. The investigators quickly searched for any signs of forced entry, robbery, or struggle, but found none. The house was in order, except for the bloody carnage in the living room. The murder weapon, a knife, was nowhere to be found. The only clue they had was a partial fingerprint found on the door handle, which they hoped would match someone in their database, along with a faint footprint on the carpet, possibly belonging to the killer. Detective Domingo was baffled by the motive and the identity of the murderer. Who would want to kill the Shaun Essies, a well-liked and respected couple in the community? What was the reason behind this savage and senseless act of violence? They had no enemies or conflicts as far as anyone knew, which made their murder even more baffling and disturbing. The police vowed to find the killer and bring justice to the Shaun Essie family, who had lost two of their own in a senseless and savage act of violence. The police had a first suspect in their sights, Caitlyn Shaun Essie, the 15-year-old daughter of Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie, the Unitarian ministers and open marriage advocates who were stabbed to death in their Orlando home on July 15, 2011. Caitlyn, who had discovered her parents' bodies after returning from a summer camp in North Carolina, was the only person in the house at the time of the murder. She was also the one who called 911, alerting the authorities to the horrific crime. The police wondered if she had a motive to kill her parents, who had a history of inviting strangers into their bed for sex as part of their unconventional lifestyle. They also questioned her alibi, which was based on the testimony of her camp counselors and fellow campers. The police interrogated Caitlyn, hoping to find cracks in her story or signs of guilt. Caitlyn, however, maintained her innocence, insisting that she had nothing to do with her parents' deaths. She cooperated with the police, providing them with access to her phone, computer, and social media accounts. She also agreed to take a polygraph test, which she passed. Caitlyn, who was in a state of shock and grief, expressed her anger and confusion at being accused of such a heinous act. She also broke down in tears as she mourned the loss of her beloved parents. She was supported by her aunt, Edwina, who flew in from New York to take care of her. She also received counseling and therapy as she tried to cope with the trauma and the stress of the investigation. Caitlyn, who was a bright and cheerful girl, had her life turned upside down by the tragic events that unfolded. She was a sophomore at Lake Highland Preparatory School, where she was an honors student and a member of the drama club. She had a passion for music and theater and dreamed of becoming a Broadway star. Caitlyn, who had no history of violence or mental illness, was a victim of a brutal crime that robbed her of her family and her innocence. She was also a suspect in a murder investigation that threatened to ruin her reputation and her future. The police turned their attention to Dominic and Allison Rothman, close friends of Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie and fellow practitioners of the open marriage lifestyle. The Rothmans, both in their 40s, were successful professionals and parents of two. Dominic was a lawyer and Allison was a real estate agent. They had met the Shaun Essies at a swingers club in Orlando, where they had bonded over their shared interest in polyamory, the practice of having multiple consensual romantic and sexual relationships. The couples had become inseparable, spending weekends together, even going on vacations as a blended family. They had also appeared in the 2010 documentary Love Unlimited, Polyamory in America, where they had discussed their views and experiences on non-monogamy. The police interrogated the Rothmans, wondering if they had any motive or involvement in the brutal murders of their friends. They asked them about their whereabouts on the night of the crime, their relationship with the victims, and their knowledge of any enemies or threats. The Rothmans cooperated with the police, providing them with alibis, phone records, and testimonies from other witnesses. They also denied any role in the killings, expressing their shock and sorrow at the loss of their friends. They claimed that they had a loving and respectful romantic and sexual relationship with the Shaun Essies, and that they had no reason to harm them. They also said that they were unaware of any conflicts or problems that the Shaun Essies had with anyone else. The Rothmans, who had lived a harmonious yet unconventional life, saw their dreams shattered by the tragic events that unfolded. They were not only grieving for their friends, but also facing suspicion and scrutiny from the authorities, the media, and the public. They were also worried about the impact of the investigation on their children and their careers. The Rothmans, who had embraced a lifestyle of freedom and sexual exploration, found themselves trapped in a nightmare of violence and mystery. The mystery of the Shaun Essie murders took a dramatic turn on July 25, 2011, when the Orlando police, led by Detective Eugene Domingo, made a stunning discovery. In a remote wooded area, about a mile away from the Shaun Essie residence, they unearthed a knife that was covered in blood and dirt. The knife, a 10-inch chef's knife that had been purchased from a Walmart store in Orlando on July 14, 2011, the day before the murders, matched the description of the murder weapon given by the medical examiner, The knife had been used to inflict multiple stab wounds to the chest, neck, and face of Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie, the Unitarian ministers and open marriage advocates who had been killed in their home on July 15, 2011. The police seized the knife and sent it to the crime lab for analysis. The results confirmed their suspicions. The knife had traces of the victim's blood and DNA, as well as the DNA of another person. The police ran the DNA profile through their database, hoping to find a match. They hit the jackpot. The DNA belonged to Steve Bwick, a 54-year-old man with a criminal record and a history of drug abuse. The police had a new person of interest in the case, and they wasted no time in tracking him down. The police had found a possible killer, and they had the proof to back it up. The discovery of the knife was a major breakthrough in the case, as it provided the police with a solid lead. But still, there were questions. How had Steve met the Shaun Essies? Was it at a swingers club, and had he been invited to join them for a night of sex? Had he snapped and stabbed them to death in a drug-fueled frenzy? The police had a person of interest in their sights, Steve Bwick, a 54-year-old man whose sedan was seen near the Shaun Essie residence on the night of the murder. Steve, an ex-felon with a troubled past and a history of drug abuse, became the prime suspect after his DNA was found on the knife that was used to kill Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie. The Unitarian ministers and open marriage advocates who were stabbed to death in their Orlando home on July 15, 2011. The police, led by Detective Eugene Domingo, tracked down Steve to a motel in Kissimmee, Florida, where he was staying in a room that contained more evidence of his involvement in the crime. The police surrounded the motel and knocked on the door of his room. Steve, who was high on bath salts at the time, opened the door and saw the police. He panicked and tried to run, but the police tackled him and arrested him. That night they interrogated him, trying to get him to confess and explain his motive. Steve, however, denied any involvement in the gruesome crime, claiming that he had never met the Shaun Essies and that he had nothing to do with their deaths. He expressed his anger and frustration at being accused of such a heinous act, casting down on the authorities' suspicions. Steve, who had lived the life of addiction and crime, was facing the most serious question of his life. Had he killed the Shaun Essies in a drug-fueled frenzy? The shocking truth behind the Shaun Essie murders was finally revealed. The killer was none other than Steve Bwick, a 54-year-old man who had been high on bath salts, a dangerous synthetic drug that had been linked to several violent incidents in Florida and across the country. Bath salts, which mimic the effects of cocaine and methamphetamine, can cause paranoia, hallucinations, and aggression. Steve had met Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie, the Unitarian ministers and open marriage advocates, at a swingers club in Orlando, where they had invited him to join them for a night of sex at their home. Unbeknownst to them, Steve had taken bath salts before arriving at their house. In a drug-induced frenzy, he attacked them with a knife that he had bought from a Walmart store the day before. He stabbed them repeatedly, mutilating their faces and bodies. He then fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of blood and evidence. The police, who had been investigating the case for 10 days, found the knife buried in a nearby wooded area, where it had Steve's DNA and the victim's blood on it. They arrested him and searched his room, where they found more proof of his guilt: a receipt for the purchase of the knife, a pair of blood-stained jeans and shoes, and a bag of bath salts. Steve, who had a criminal record and a history of drug abuse, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming that he had never met the Shaun Essies and that he had nothing to do with their deaths. He was lying, and the police had the DNA evidence to prove it. Steve, who had betrayed the trust of the Shaun Essies and killed them in a drug-fueled rage, was facing 2 counts of first-degree murder and the wrath of an angry public, who were outraged and horrified by his actions they had seen on TV or online. The final chapter in the Shaun Essie murder case was written in a Florida courtroom, where the killer, Steve Bwick, faced the consequences of his actions. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Miles Ocampo, a veteran of high-profile cases, presented a strong case against Bwick, who had stabbed Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie to death in their Orlando home on July 15, 2011. Ocampo showed the jury the gruesome photos of the crime scene, the bloodstained knife that was used as the murder weapon, and the DNA evidence that linked Bwick to the killings. He also played the 911 call made by the victim's daughter, Caitlyn, who had discovered her parents' bodies, and the testimony of the police officers who had arrested Bwick at a motel in Kissimmee, Florida, where he had been staying with a bag of bath salts, a synthetic drug that had been linked to several violent incidents in Florida and across the country. Ocampo portrayed Bwick as a cold-blooded killer who had betrayed the trust of the Shaun Essies, who had invited him to join them for a night of sex and had killed them in a drug-fueled frenzy. He asked the jury to deliver justice for the Shaun Essie family, who had suffered a devastating loss. The defense attorney, Mitchell Raimundo, a public defender who had taken on Bwick's case, argued for a different verdict. He claimed that Bwick was not guilty by reason of insanity and that he had been under the influence of bath salts, which had caused him to lose touch with reality and act impulsively. He said that Bwick had a history of mental illness and drug abuse and that he needed treatment, not punishment. He appealed to the jury's compassion and understanding and asked them to spare Bwick's life. The victim's family, who had been following the trial closely, watched as the jury deliberated for 2 hours before returning with their verdict. They found Bwick guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a mix of emotions to the courtroom. Some felt that the verdict was too lenient and that Bwick deserved the death penalty. Others felt that the verdict was fair and that Bwick would pay for his crimes for the rest of his life. The impact of the verdict rippled through the lives of all involved, forever altering their perception of the world. The trial of Steve Bwick, the bath salts killer who brutally murdered Evan and Danielle Shaun Essie, the Unitarian ministers and open marriage advocates, in their Orlando home on July 15, 2011, left a lasting impact on the lives of those who were touched by the tragedy. Caitlyn Shaun Essie, the 15-year-old daughter of the victims who had found their mutilated bodies, was traumatized by the horrific ordeal. She sought solace and therapy in the support of her extended family, who had long presumed her parents dead. She also received an outpouring of sympathy from the public, who donated over $100,000 to a fund set up by the Miami Herald to help her with her education and future. Dominic and Allison Rothman, the close friends of the Shaun Essie family and fellow proponents of the non-monogamous lifestyle, were scarred by the suspicion cast upon them by the police and the media. They distanced themselves from the open marriage scene, which had been growing in popularity in Florida and across the country. They focused on healing their own relationship and coping with the loss of their friends. The police, led by Detective Eugene Domingo, who had worked tirelessly to solve the case and bring the killer to justice, were forever marked by the horrors they witnessed. They continued their efforts to combat the rising threat of bath salts, a synthetic drug that had been linked to several violent incidents in Florida and across the country. They also praised the bravery and cooperation of the witnesses in the victim's family, who had helped them with the investigation. And the Shaun Essie family, who had been estranged from Evan and Danielle for years, were forever scarred by the loss of their loved ones. They found strength in their shared memories and the love that remained. They also learned to accept and respect the choices that Evan and Danielle had made and the legacy that they had left behind. Richard Angelbert was a 48-year-old man living in Littleton, Colorado. He was a well-known real estate agent in the community, often seen driving around in his sleek black BMW with the license plate Sexy Realtor, showing homes to clients. Richard was married to Wendy, a school principal, and had a stepson named Harrison. He graduated from the University of Colorado with a degree in business and had been in the real estate business for over 20 years. People in Littleton trusted Richard because he always seemed friendly and reliable. Richard lived in a large 2-story house with a well-manicured lawn. His neighbors often saw him working in the yard, greeting them with a warm smile and a wave. He was involved in local events and charity fundraisers, often sponsoring local Little League teams and attending church on Sundays. Richard seemed to have the perfect life, with a beautiful home, a successful career, and a loving family. However, Richard had a secret life. For the past 2 years, he had been in a sexual relationship with his stepson, Harrison. Richard kept this relationship hidden from everyone, fearing it would ruin his reputation and career. In addition to this, he continued to meet other men for sex through his work, using the homes he showed as secret meeting places. These double lives created a lot of stress and tension for Richard. In the days before his death, Richard was busy with work, closing deals and meeting clients. He spent long hours at the office and often came home late. He was looking forward to a weekend getaway to the Bahamas with his wife Wendy, hoping to relax and forget about his troubles for a while. Richard was also planning to attend a 4th of July barbecue at a friend's house, where he expected to catch up with old friends and enjoy some time away from his hectic life. Richard's friends described him as charismatic and charming. He had a way of making people feel comfortable and important. Despite his friendly exterior, Richard was deeply troubled by his hidden life. He felt guilty about his affair with Harrison and the lies he told to keep it a secret. He was also worried about Wendy finding out, fearing it would destroy their marriage and his standing in the community. In his last days, Richard was a man under pressure, trying to juggle his public persona with his private turmoil. His dreams of a perfect life were slowly unraveling, leading to a tragic and violent end. On June 27, 2014, around 3:00 p.m., Wendy Angelbert returned early from her job as a school principal. She was looking forward to a relaxing evening, maybe watching some shows on Netflix and catching up on her favorite book. As she walked through the front door of their house on Bwick Street in Littleton, Colorado, everything seemed normal at first. She put her keys on the kitchen counter and called out for Richard, but there was no answer. Feeling a bit uneasy, Wendy decided to check the basement where Richard often spent time working on his real estate files or watching the History Channel. As she descended the stairs, she noticed that the basement door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. She called his name again, louder this time, but still no response. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she was met with a scene of horror. Richard's lifeless body was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by signs of a violent struggle. There were bloodstains on the carpet and furniture, and Richard's face was bruised and battered. A men's luxury belt was wrapped tightly around his neck, clearly used to choke him to death. Wendy screamed in terror and rushed to her husband's side, shaking him and desperately trying to wake him up. But it was too late. In a state of shock and disbelief, Wendy grabbed her cell phone and dialed 911. Her hands trembled as she spoke to the operator, her voice cracking with emotion. "My husband is dead. I think he's been murdered," she cried, struggling to catch her breath. The operator tried to calm her down and instructed her to stay on the line until the police arrived. Wendy's neighbor, Luby Johnson-Gantz, heard the commotion and came over to see what was happening. She found Wendy sitting on the front steps, sobbing uncontrollably. Luby stayed with Wendy, trying to comfort her while they waited for the police. The minutes felt like hours, and Wendy's mind raced with questions about who could have done this and why. When the police finally arrived, they quickly secured the scene and escorted Wendy and Luby away from the basement. Wendy was in a state of shock, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. She kept repeating, "Who would do this to Richard?" over and over again, her mind unable to process the brutal reality of her husband's death. The discovery of Richard's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Littleton. News of the murder spread quickly, with neighbors and friends gathering outside the Angelbert home, trying to make sense of the tragedy that had struck their seemingly perfect neighborhood. On June 27, 2014, at 3:15 p.m., the Littleton Police Department received a frantic 911 call from Wendy Angelbert. Officers arrived at the scene within minutes, led by Detective James Cabell, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous approach. The Angelbert home, located on the quiet Oak Street, was quickly surrounded by police cars, and yellow crime scene tape was stretched around the perimeter. Detective Cabell and his team entered the basement, where they were confronted with a grisly scene. Richard Angelbert's body lay on the floor, with a men's luxury belt wrapped tightly around his neck. Bloodstains were visible on the carpet and nearby furniture, indicating a violent struggle. Detective Cabell, a spry man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, took in the scene with a steely resolve. The police began their investigation by collecting evidence. They photographed the scene from various angles, documenting every detail. The belt used in the murder was carefully bagged as evidence, and detectives searched for fingerprints and any other clues that might lead to the killer. Detective Cabell noted the overturned furniture and signs of a struggle, indicating that Richard had fought for his life. Forensic experts arrived to process the scene, using luminol to detect blood traces and collecting samples for DNA analysis. They meticulously combed the area for hair, fibers, and any other potential evidence. The brutality of the murder shocked even the most experienced officers, but they remained focused on gathering all the information they could. Detective Cabell interviewed Wendy Angelbert, who was still in shock from discovering her husband's body. She described her day and the horrifying moment she found Richard. Her account was detailed and emotional, but she insisted she had no idea who could have done this. Wendy's alibi was quickly verified, as she had been at work at the time of the murder. Next, the police began canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with neighbors, including Luby Johnson-Gantz, who had come to Wendy's aid. Sarah described hearing Wendy's screams and finding her on the front steps, distraught and incoherent. Other neighbors mentioned seeing Richard earlier in the day, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The police also checked Richard's recent phone and email records, hoping to find any leads. They discovered several suspicious messages and calls suggesting that Richard had been meeting with various men for illicit sex. This revelation added a new layer to the investigation, pointing to potential motives related to Richard's hidden life. As the day turned into evening, the police continued their work, determined to find the person responsible for Richard Engelbert's brutal murder. The scene was cleared, and Detective Cattle and his team reviewed the evidence collected, preparing for the next steps in their investigation. The community of Littleton watched anxiously, hoping for answers and justice for Richard Engelbert. The first suspect in Richard Engelbert's murder was his wife, Wendy Angelbert. Wendy, 47, was a respected school principal in Littleton, known for her intelligence and strong personality. She had been with the school district for over 15 years and was heavily involved in community activities. Her colleagues described her as dedicated and authoritative, always striving for excellence. Wendy was brought in for questioning the day after the murder on June 28, 2014. Detective James Cattle led the interrogation, trying to piece together her actions and emotions. Wendy appeared exhausted and distraught, but she answered questions calmly. She recounted her day at work and the horrifying discovery of Richard's body when she returned home. Despite her composed demeanor, Wendy's anger and confusion were evident. She expressed disbelief and frustration over the affair, insisting she had no idea Richard was sexually involved with other men. The revelation of the affair added tension to the interrogation as Detective Cattle probed deeper into Wendy's feelings about her husband's betrayal. Detective Cattle asked Wendy about her relationship with Richard. She admitted they have a strong partnership, but mentioned that they had faced some challenges recently. Wendy claimed she was unaware of Richard's secret life. She explained she had recent ski injury which had caused her difficulty in reading people's actions, and suggested this might be why she missed any signs of Richard's double life. Wendy's alibi was solid. She had been at the school all day, attending meetings and preparing for the upcoming school year. Colleagues and security footage confirmed her presence at work during the time of the murder. Nonetheless, her connection to the victim made her a person of interest. Detective Cattle also explored Wendy's possible motives. Her reputation and career were crucial to her, and Richard's affair threatened both. However, Wendy firmly denied any involvement in the murder, maintaining her innocence throughout the questioning. She was cooperative and provided all requested information, including access to her phone and emails. The police conducted a thorough search of the Engelbert home, looking for any evidence that might link Wendy to the crime. They found nothing incriminating, reinforcing her alibi and statements. Still, the detectives remained cautious, aware that emotions could drive even the most rational individuals to commit desperate acts. Wendy was released after several hours of questioning, but she remained under scrutiny as the investigation continued. The police kept a close watch on her, monitoring her interactions and movements while they explored other leads. The murder of Richard Engelbert was proving to be a complex case, with layers of secrets and motives slowly unraveling. Harrison Engelbert, Richard's 21-year-old stepson, was the next suspect. Harrison was a college student and part-time bartender, known for his troubled past. He had been in and out of rehab and 12-step programs as a teenager. Despite these challenges, Harrison was determined to turn his life around and was pursuing a degree in psychology at a local community college. On June 28, 2014, Harrison was brought in for questioning. Detective James Cattle, aware of the sensitive nature of Harrison's relationship with Richard, approached the interrogation with caution. Harrison appeared nervous but cooperative, willing to share his side of the story. Harrison admitted to the police that he had been in a secret sexual relationship with his stepfather for the past 2 years. He described feeling conflicted, struggling with the deceit and secrecy. Harrison revealed that he had recently broken off the affair after discovering that Richard had been cheating on him with dozens of other men, using homes he showed as a real estate agent as secret meeting places. During the interrogation, Harrison expressed a mix of anger and sadness. He felt betrayed by Richard, not only because of the affair, but also because of the lies and manipulation. Despite his resentment, Harrison claimed he had no intention of harming Richard. He stated that he had been bartending on the night of the murder, and several witnesses confirmed his alibi. Detective Cattle delved deeper into Harrison's possible motives. The young man's history of emotional turmoil and substance abuse raised concerns, but his recent efforts to stay sober and focused on his studies painted a different picture. Harrison was open about his struggles and his desire to move forward, away from the toxic relationship with Richard. The police also examined Harrison's electronic devices and social media accounts, looking for any evidence of his involvement in the crime. They found messages between him and Richard that showed tension and conflict, but nothing that directly implicated him in the murder. Harrison's DNA was found at the crime scene, but as he lived in the house, this was not unexpected. Harrison's cooperation and consistent alibi made it difficult for the police to pin the crime on him. He was released after several hours of questioning, but he remained a key figure in the investigation. The police continued to monitor his activities and interactions, searching for any inconsistencies or new evidence that might shed light on his involvement. The complex dynamics between Richard and Harrison added a layer of complexity to the case, leaving Detective Cattle and his team with more questions than answers. As they continued to dig deeper, they hoped to uncover the truth behind Richard Engelbert's brutal murder. Alexa Hernandez, 30, was the third suspect in the investigation. Alexa had a history with Richard Engelbert that made her a person of interest. She had once caught Richard having sex with her husband in the bathroom of a house they were touring together, which led to the end of her marriage. Known for her fiery temper, Alexa had several confrontations with Richard since the incident. On June 29, 2014, Detective James Cattle brought Alexa in for questioning. Alexa was a waitress at a popular local diner and had a reputation for being outspoken and strong-willed. She walked into the interrogation room with a defiant expression, ready to defend herself. Detective Cattle started by asking Alexa about her relationship with Richard. She admitted that she despised him for ruining her marriage and causing her immense emotional pain. Alexa described the day she discovered her husband and Richard together as the worst day of her life. She had confronted Richard several times after that, demanding answers and an apology, but he had always brushed her off. When asked about her whereabouts on the day of the murder, Alexa said she had been working a double shift at a diner called Denny's. She provided the names of her coworkers who could verify her alibi. Detective Cattle called the diner and spoke with Alexa's manager, who confirmed that Alexa had been at work all day. Multiple coworkers also confirmed seeing her during her shifts. Despite her solid alibi, Detective Cattle explored Alexa's possible motives further. Her intense anger toward Richard was evident, but she insisted she had moved on and was focusing on rebuilding her life. Alexa shared that she was taking night classes at a local community college, hoping to become a social worker and help others who had gone through similar struggles. The police searched Alexa's home and car, looking for any evidence that might link her to the crime. They found nothing suspicious or incriminating. Alexa's phone records and social media activity showed no contact with Richard in the weeks leading up to the murder. Throughout the interrogation, Alexa remained calm and composed, despite her obvious disdain for Richard. She answered all questions directly and showed no signs of guilt or deception. Detective Cattle noted her cooperation and honesty, but knew they had to keep all possibilities open. After several hours of questioning, Alexa was released. The police continued to monitor her, aware that her past with Richard made her a potential suspect. However, her alibi and lack of evidence made it difficult to tie her to the crime directly. The investigation into Richard Engelbert's murder grew more complex with each interview. Detective Cattle and his team were determined to uncover the truth, but the web of secrets and lies surrounding Richard's life made their task increasingly challenging. They pressed on, hoping to find the piece of evidence that would finally reveal the killer. On July 3, 2014, the investigation took a dramatic turn. It was a hot summer day in Littleton, Colorado, with temperatures reaching the high 80s. Around 10 o'clock a.m., Detective James Cattle received a call from the forensic lab. They had found crucial new evidence while re-examining items from the crime scene. Among Richard Engelbert's belongings was a small hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector installed in the basement. Detective Cattle and his team immediately retrieved the footage. The camera had recorded the basement's activities for the past few weeks, capturing Richard's secret meetings and interactions. As they reviewed the footage, they discovered a recording from the day of the murder. The video showed a heated argument between Richard and his stepson, Harrison Engelbert. The argument quickly escalated into a physical struggle. In the video, Harrison grabbed the luxury belt from a nearby chair and used it to choke Richard in a fit of rage. The footage captured the entire incident, providing undeniable evidence of Harrison's involvement in the murder. The teen was shocked by the brutality and clear motive behind the act: anger and betrayal. With this new evidence, Detective Cattle contacted Harrison and asked him to come in for further questioning. Harrison arrived at the station, unaware of the video evidence against him. During the interrogation, Cattle confronted him with the footage. Harrison's demeanor changed instantly. His initial calmness turned to panic and desperation. Realizing he had been caught, Harrison broke down and confessed. He explained that he felt trapped in the relationship with Richard, manipulated by both his stepfather and his mother, Wendy. The constant deceit and Richard's infidelity had pushed him to his breaking point. Harrison admitted that, in a moment of uncontrollable rage, he had killed Richard to free himself from the suffocating situation. Detective Cattle carefully documented Harrison's confession, ensuring every detail was recorded. The new evidence, combined with the confession, left no doubt about Harrison's guilt. The police now had a clear picture of the events leading up to Richard Angelbert's murder and the complex web of secrets and lies that had surrounded the case. On July 4, 2014, just before noon, the Littleton Police Department made a decisive move. With Harrison Engelbert's confession and the incriminating video evidence, Detective James Cattle and his team were ready to arrest him for the murder of Richard Angelbert. Harrison, 21, a college student and part-time bartender, had been living a life of turmoil and confusion. Despite his attempts to overcome his troubled past, the intense emotional pressure from his affair with his stepfather and his mother's manipulations had driven him to a breaking point. The police learned that Harrison, overwhelmed by feelings of betrayal and manipulation, had killed Richard in a fit of rage. On the day of the arrest, Detective Cattle and several officers arrived at Harrison's apartment. They knocked on the door, and Harrison, looking pale and exhausted, answered. He was handcuffed and read his rights. Harrison seemed resigned to his fate, showing little emotion as he was led to the police car. The neighborhood was quiet, but a few curious onlookers watched as the scene unfolded. Back at the station, Harrison was formally charged with the murder of Richard Angelbert. Detective Cattle conducted a final interview to document all the details of Harrison's confession. Harrison reiterated his feelings of being trapped and manipulated by Richard and pressured by his mother, Wendy. He described the events leading up to the murder, including the violent argument that had escalated into the fatal attack. Wendy Angelbert, Richard's wife and Harrison's mother, was also brought in for questioning. The investigation had revealed that Wendy had known about the affair for months and had pressured Harrison to continue it. She feared that Richard's reckless sexual behavior would ruin her chances in the upcoming election for school superintendent. Wendy, however, was not directly involved in the murder. Her deception and manipulation added a layer of complexity to the case, but she was not charged with any crime. Richard's family was shocked by the revelations. They had seen Richard as a devoted husband and father, unaware of his double life. The arrest of Harrison brought a mix of emotions: grief for Richard's death, anger at the betrayal, and a sense of tragic inevitability given the circumstances. The community of Littleton was stunned by the news. The murder had exposed a hidden world of secrets and lies, shaking the town to its core. As Harrison awaited trial, the Angelbert family and the entire community tried to come to terms with the shocking events that had unfolded. The police had solved the case, but the emotional aftermath would linger for a long time. The truth about Richard's life and death had been revealed, but the scars left behind would take much longer to heal. The trial of Harrison Angelbert began on August 15, 2014 in Littleton, Colorado. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, and local media, all eager to hear the details of the case. The trial was a significant event in the community, drawing attention from both local and national news outlets. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Laura Mitchell, a 45-year-old known for her strong courtroom presence and dedication to justice. She argued that Harrison's murder of Richard Angelbert was premeditated and driven by deep-seated anger and betrayal. She presented the hidden camera footage and Harrison's confession as key evidence. Mitchell emphasized that Harrison's actions were the result of a troubled and volatile relationship, but ultimately, he was responsible for the brutal death of his stepfather. The defense was represented by non-binary advocate Z. Barnes, a 40-year-old attorney with a reputation for defending high-profile cases. Barnes argued that Harrison's actions were the result of intense emotional turmoil and manipulation from both Richard and his mother, Wendy. They claimed that Harrison's unstable mental state and the pressure he faced made it difficult for him to control his actions. Barnes sought a verdict of guilty, but with consideration for a lesser charge, hoping for a more lenient sentence due to the circumstances. During the trial, the victim's family, including Wendy Angelbert and other relatives, sat quietly, visibly distressed by the proceedings. They had been shocked by the revelations of Richard's double life and the turmoil it had caused. Their emotional reactions were palpable as they listened to the details of the affair and the murder. On September 5, 2014, the jury returned with a verdict. Harrison Angelbert was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury determined that while Harrison had acted in a fit of rage, the killing was not premeditated. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some felt the verdict was just, given the emotional and psychological factors involved. Others felt it was too lenient, given the brutality of the crime. Harrison was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing brought a sense of closure to the case, but the pain and trauma for Richard's family were far from over. The Angelbert family struggled to find peace, knowing that Richard's death had been caused by someone so close to them. The trial's impact extended beyond the courtroom. It forced the community to confront the hidden realities of betrayal and manipulation, leaving a lasting mark on Littleton. As the case concluded, the Angelbert family and the town of Littleton began the difficult process of healing from the shocking events that had unfolded. After the trial of Harrison Angelbert concluded in September 2014, life in Littleton, Colorado, slowly began to return to normal, but the impact of the case lingered. The community, deeply shaken by the brutal murder of Richard Angelbert and the subsequent revelations, faced a long process of healing and adjustment. Harrison Angelbert, now serving a 25-year prison sentence, remained in the Colorado Department of Corrections. His life behind bars was marked by the same struggles he faced outside, dealing with his own emotions and the consequences of his actions. In prison, Harrison was reportedly quiet and withdrawn, focusing on completing his education through available programs. He used the time to reflect on his past decisions and seek counseling for his emotional issues. Wendy Angelbert, Richard's wife, had her own challenges to face. The trial had exposed her knowledge of Richard's affair and her manipulative actions, which had a significant impact on her personal and professional life. The scandal affected her candidacy for school superintendent, a position she had been campaigning for diligently. Despite her previous efforts to present a perfect image, the revelations led to her withdrawal from the race. Wendy tried to rebuild her life away from the public eye, seeking therapy to cope with the emotional fallout and to address the impact of the scandal on her reputation. In the months following the trial, Littleton began to move forward, though the scars of the case remained. The community held memorials and support events to honor Richard Angelbert's memory and to support those affected by the crime. The Angelbert family's tragedy served as a sobering reminder of the hidden struggles that can lie behind closed doors. As life resumed its normal pace, the case remained a poignant chapter in Littleton's history, a reminder of the deep impact of betrayal and violence on individuals and communities alike. The story of Richard Angelbert's murder is a tragic reminder of the complexities and hidden secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. It's a tale of manipulation, deceit, and the devastating consequences of living a double life. In late July 2017, this is the story of Caroline Stevens, a dedicated pediatric nurse whose life was cut short by a sinister plot involving her husband and their foster daughter. Caroline Stevens was a 52-year-old pediatric nurse who lived in Corvallis, Oregon. Known for her kind heart and dedication to her work, Caroline was a beloved figure in her community. She had a special gift for connecting with children, something that made her a standout nurse at the local hospital, Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center. Caroline's colleagues often spoke about her compassion and patience. She was the nurse who would stay late to comfort a scared child or to talk with worried parents. Caroline had a unique perspective on life. As a former foster child, she knew the struggles that many children faced. This personal history drove her to help others, especially children and teens in the foster care system. She was actively involved in community programs and often volunteered at local shelters. Caroline's friends described her as nurturing and empathetic, always willing to lend a helping hand. Her home was often filled with laughter and the smell of homemade cookies, a testament to her love for baking. Caroline was married to Dr. Oliver Stevens, an entomologist at Oregon State University. They had been married for over 20 years and were well known in the community. They had no biological children, but they had fostered several over the years. Their most recent foster child was Charmin Brisco, who had turned 18 just a few months before Caroline's death. Caroline was very close to Charmin, treating her as her own daughter and supporting her plans to attend Oregon State in the fall. In the days leading up to her death, Caroline was busy with her usual activities. She had just organized a small charity event at her church, St. Mary's Catholic Church, where she was a devoted member. Her friends recalled how excited she was about an upcoming summer picnic planned for the children in her care program. Caroline's diary entries from this time reflected her joy and anticipation for the future. She wrote about her dreams of continuing her work with children and perhaps even starting a small nonprofit organization dedicated to helping foster kids. Caroline's life was a beacon of hope and kindness, making her tragic end all the more shocking and mysterious for everyone who knew her. It was late at night on July 29, 2017, when the peaceful town of Corvallis was jolted by a horrifying discovery. Caroline Stevens' body was found in the backyard of her home. The time was around 10:30 p.m. The person who found her was a neighbor, Lisa Turner. Lisa had come over to return a casserole dish she had borrowed earlier in the week. As she approached the house, she noticed the back gate was open, which was unusual. Lisa decided to check if everything was all right. She walked into the backyard and found Caroline lying on the ground motionless. Caroline's body was partially hidden by the tall garden plants she had lovingly tended. Lisa's first reaction was shock. She dropped the dish and screamed, her voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. She quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to explain what she had found. The emergency operator calmed Lisa down and got the necessary details. Lisa described how Caroline looked. She was covered in dirt and there was a rope around her neck. The operator assured Lisa that help was on the way and advised her to stay where she was but not to touch anything. Lisa, still in shock, sat on the back steps, trying to process what she had just seen. When the police and paramedics arrived, they found Lisa visibly shaken but able to give a statement. Officer Joey Martins, one of the first on the scene, described Lisa as pale and trembling, her voice barely a whisper as she recounted the events. The backyard was quickly cordoned off with yellow police tape as investigators began their work. Caroline's body was carefully examined. The medical examiner, Dr. Susan Ng, noted the severe head injuries and the strangulation marks on Caroline's neck. She confirmed that Caroline had been bludgeoned with a tire iron and then strangled with a rope. The scene was gruesome, with blood spatters on the garden pathway and the tire iron lying nearby, partially hidden under a bush. News of the murder spread quickly through Corvallis. People were shocked that something so terrible could happen in their quiet town. Friends and family gathered outside the Stevens home, comforting each other and trying to make sense of the tragedy. Caroline's death was a harsh blow to the community. She was a beloved figure, and the brutality of her murder left everyone in a state of disbelief and fear. The police promised to find out who was responsible for this heinous crime and bring them to justice. The police arrived quickly at the Stevens home on July 29, 2017. By 11:00 p.m., the quiet neighborhood of Corvallis was buzzing with activity. Officer Joey Martinez, along with Detective Linda Salina and Detective Mike Prosper, led the investigation. They were known for their thoroughness and dedication. Detective Salina, a 10-year veteran of the force, was especially known for her keen eye for detail. Detective Prosper, her partner, was equally experienced and meticulous. The crime scene was a mess. Caroline Stevens' body lay in the backyard, surrounded by her garden plants. Blood was splattered on the garden pathway, and a tire iron lay nearby, partially hidden under a bush. The rope around Caroline's neck was still tightly wound. The detectives immediately began to secure the area, putting up yellow police tape to keep curious neighbors and onlookers at a distance. Detective Salina took the lead in examining the body. She noted the severe head injuries and the clear marks of strangulation on Caroline's neck. It was evident that Caroline had been bludgeoned with the tire iron and then strangled with the rope. The brutality of the crime was shocking. Detective Salina carefully documented the scene, taking photographs and making notes. Detective Prosper focused on gathering evidence from the surrounding area. He collected the tire iron and bagged it for forensic analysis. He also took samples of the blood spatter and examined the rope for any potential clues. The backyard was meticulously combed for any signs that might point to the murderer. As the investigation continued, the police used various tools and methods to gather evidence. They brought in a forensic team to dust for fingerprints and collect DNA samples. The tire iron was sent to the lab for analysis to determine if it had any fingerprints or other trace evidence. The rope was also examined for fibers or hairs that might help identify the killer. By the early hours of July 30, the police had gathered a significant amount of evidence from the crime scene. Detective Selena and Detective Prosper reviewed their findings and began to piece together the events that led to Caroline's murder. The brutality of the crime suggested a personal motive, and they knew they had to act quickly to find the murderer before they could strike again. The investigation was just beginning, but the detectives were determined to solve the case and bring justice for Caroline Stevens. The peaceful town of Corvallis was now the center of a major murder investigation, and the police were ready to uncover the truth. The first suspect the police investigated was Dr. Oliver Stevens, Caroline's husband. Dr. Stevens, 55, was an entomologist at Oregon State University. He studied insects and was well known in his field. To the outside world, he seemed like a mild-mannered and hardworking man. However, some in the community found him creepy. Oliver had a reputation for being distant and socially awkward. When the police arrived at Oliver's workplace to question him, he was in his lab, working late as usual. He seemed calm and cooperative. Oliver told the police he had been at work all day and only came home late in the evening. He claimed to have found the house empty and assumed Caroline was out visiting friends. Oliver's alibi was that he had been at the university the entire time, with colleagues who could confirm his presence. Detectives Selena and Prosper interviewed Oliver in the small, cluttered office at the university. Oliver appeared calm but showed little emotion when discussing his wife's death. He described his relationship with Caroline as good and normal. However, the detectives noticed that he avoided making direct eye contact and seemed uncomfortable when they asked about his personal life. The police were particularly interested in Oliver's recent behavior. They discovered that Oliver had married Charmin Brisco, their former foster daughter, in a small ceremony just 6 days after Caroline's death. This raised so many red flags. Marrying so soon after his wife's brutal murder seemed extremely suspicious and definitely earned him the title of creepiest man in Oregon. Oliver calmly explained that he and Charmin had developed feelings for each other over time, and that the marriage was their way to move forward after Caroline's death. The police pressed Oliver on this point, asking if Caroline knew about his relationship with Charmin. Oliver admitted that Caroline had recently become suspicious and had confronted him about it. He claimed that they had argued but insisted he had nothing to do with her death. Oliver's demeanor during the interrogation was mostly calm, but he became visibly nervous when discussing his relationship with Charmin. Detective Selena found Oliver's behavior odd. Marrying so quickly after Caroline's death and his nervousness during the interrogation made him a prime suspect. However, they needed more evidence to link him directly to the murder. They decided to keep a close eye on him and continued to investigate other leads. As the investigation progressed, the detectives hoped to find more clues that would either confirm or dispel their suspicions about Dr. Oliver Stevens. His unusual behavior and rapid remarriage made him a key figure in the case, and the police were determined to uncover the truth. The second suspect the police investigated was Charmin Brisco, the Stevens' former foster daughter and also Oliver Stevens' new wife. Charmin was 18 years old and had lived with Caroline and Oliver since she was 17. She had a troubled past, growing up with a violent alcoholic father. Despite these hardships, Charmin was an academically gifted student and had plans to attend Oregon State University in the fall. The police found Charmin packing up the small apartment that Oliver and Caroline had rented for her when she turned 18. Detective Linda Selena and Detective Mike Prosper visited her there to ask questions about Caroline's death. Charmin was quiet and reserved during the interview, traits her teachers and peers often mentioned. She appeared deeply affected by the events, but her answers were calm and straightforward. Charmin told the detectives about her relationship with Caroline, describing her as a kind and loving mother figure. She said Caroline had always supported her, especially in her academic pursuits. When asked about Oliver, Charmin admitted that they had developed feelings for each other and that Oliver had treated her to a lavish dinner at a fancy restaurant for her 18th birthday. It was during this dinner that Oliver confessed his love for her and said Caroline was just a nuisance. The police found it unusual that Charmin married Oliver just days after Caroline's death. Charmin explained that they were in love and wanted to move on with their lives. She insisted she had no involvement in Caroline's murder and that she had been at home studying on the night of the crime. Her alibi was that she had spent the evening alone, preparing for her upcoming university courses. Detective Selena noticed that Charmin's answers were consistent but sensed a lingering fear in her demeanor. Charmin seemed genuinely saddened by Caroline's death, but also appeared to be hiding something. The detectives asked Charmin about her thoughts on Oliver's behavior after Caroline's death. Charmin hesitated but then said Oliver had been supportive and caring, helping her through the difficult time. The police also asked Charmin if Caroline knew about her relationship with Oliver. Charmin said that Caroline had suspected something but had not confronted her directly. This information, combined with a rapid marriage, made Charmin a person of interest. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, the detectives had to consider other possibilities. As the interview concluded, the police remained cautious about Charmin's involvement. Her relationship with Oliver and her proximity to the Stevens family made her a key figure in the investigation. The detectives decided to monitor her closely while continuing to gather more information. The investigation into Charmin Brisco's role in the case was ongoing, with detectives looking for any clues that could either confirm or disprove her involvement in Caroline Stevens' murder. The third suspect the police investigated was Samuel Mangaro, a 43-year-old refugee from South Sudan. Samuel had moved to America with his 4 children after losing his wife during the Civil War. He found work as a janitor and rented a small apartment in Corvallis. Samuel's connection to the Stevens family came from a dispute with Dr. Oliver Stevens, who was his former landlord. Samuel had been evicted from his apartment by Dr. Stevens just a month before Caroline's death. Oliver had given Samuel and his family very little notice, making room for Charmin Brisco to live there rent-free. This eviction left Samuel and his children homeless for a short period, which caused him significant distress. The police considered Samuel a suspect because he had a motive for holding a grudge against Oliver. Detectives Linda Salina and Mike Prosper went to interview Samuel at his new apartment. Samuel was cooperative but visibly upset about the eviction. He spoke about the challenges of starting a new life in America and the hardship caused by losing his apartment. Samuel described how difficult it had been to find a new place to live while trying to keep his job and take care of his children. During the interview, Samuel appeared calm but frustrated when discussing Dr. Stevens. He admitted he was angry about the eviction but denied any involvement in Caroline's murder. Samuel explained that on the night of the murder, he was at work. His employer confirmed that Samuel had been working his usual night shift as a janitor at a local office building. The police checked Samuel's alibi and found it to be solid. His time card showed he had clocked in and out at the correct times, and security footage confirmed his presence at the building throughout the night. Despite his anger towards Oliver, there was no evidence linking Samuel to the crime scene. Detective Salina noticed that Samuel's main concern was the well-being of his children. He talked about how they were adjusting to life in Corvallis and his hopes for their future. Samuel was a hard-working man trying to provide for his family under challenging circumstances. His focus on his children and his solid alibi made it less likely that he was involved in Caroline's murder. After interviewing Samuel, the detectives concluded that while he had a motive to dislike Oliver, there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime. They decided to keep Samuel in mind, but turned their attention back to other leads that might provide more substantial clues. As the investigation continued, the police were determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to Caroline Stevens. Samuel Mangaro remained a person of interest, but the focus shifted back to the Stevens family and their complex relationships. On August 5, 2017, a week after Caroline Stevens' murder, the police received a crucial piece of new evidence. It was a hot and sunny afternoon when Detective Linda Salina got a call from the forensic lab. The lab had analyzed the tire iron found at the crime scene and discovered fingerprints that didn't belong to Caroline or Oliver. These fingerprints belonged to Charmin Brisco. The police immediately revisited the Stevens home to gather more evidence. This time, they brought in a specialized team to search for anything that might have been overlooked. Detective Mike Prosper led the team, and they meticulously combed through the house and backyard. They focused on areas where Charmin might have left traces of her presence. During the search, they found a hidden compartment in the garage. Inside, there were several personal items belonging to Charmin, including a notebook. This notebook contained detailed entries about her sexual relationship with Oliver and her growing frustration with Caroline. One entry, dated just days before the murder, expressed anger towards Caroline for being a nasty bleep and mentioned a plan to make that bleep pay. The notebook was a significant find. It provided a direct link between Charmin and the murder. The police also found a pair of gloves in Charmin's apartment, which tested positive for traces of Caroline's blood. This evidence suggested that Charmin had worn the gloves while handling the tire iron, which explained why her fingerprints were only found on the weapon and not at the crime scene. With this new evidence, the police called Charmin in for another round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the notebook and the blood-stained gloves. Charmin's demeanor changed drastically. She became visibly nervous and struggled to maintain her composure. She initially denied any involvement, but the mounting evidence made it difficult for her to keep her story straight. Charmin eventually broke down and confessed to being present at the crime scene, but insisted that Oliver was the one who had killed Caroline. She claimed that she had tried to stop him, but was too scared to report the crime. Charmin's confession added a new layer to the investigation, indicating that Oliver and Charmin might have been co-conspirators. The police reviewed Charmin's confession and the new evidence carefully. They realized that while Charmin's involvement was now clear, they still needed to determine Oliver's exact role in the murder. The focus of the investigation shifted to proving Oliver's participation and understanding the full extent of their plan. As the investigation progressed, the police were more determined than ever to bring justice for Caroline Stevens. The new evidence provided a clearer picture of what had happened, but the case was far from over. The detectives knew they had to keep pushing to uncover the whole truth. On August 10, 2017, the police felt they had enough evidence to arrest Dr. Oliver Stevens for the murder of his wife, Caroline. Dr. Stevens, 55, was a respected entomologist at Oregon State University, but behind his professional facade, he harbored dark secrets. Oliver had married Charmin Brisco, their former foster daughter, just 6 days after Caroline's brutal murder, raising many suspicions. Detectives Linda Salina and Mike Prosper reviewed the new evidence carefully. Charmin's confession, the blood-stained gloves, and the notebook entries all pointed towards a conspiracy between Oliver and Charmin. They believed that Oliver orchestrated the murder to be with Charmin without any obstacles. Caroline had recently become suspicious of Oliver's behavior, which likely pushed him to act. On the morning of August 11, the police planned the arrest. They knew Oliver was teaching a class at the university, so they decided to confront him there. At 10:00 a.m., Detectives Salina and Prosper arrived at the campus. They waited outside his lecture hall until he finished his class. As Oliver exited the room, the detectives approached him, identified themselves, and informed him that he was under arrest for the murder of Caroline Stevens. Oliver's reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. He tried to maintain his composure but couldn't hide his surprise. The students and faculty nearby were equally shocked as they watched the arrest unfold. The detectives handcuffed Oliver and read him his rights. He was then escorted to the police car, maintaining a stoic expression throughout the process. Back at the police station, Oliver was formally charged with first-degree murder. During the interrogation, he continued to deny his involvement, claiming that Charmin had acted alone. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The notebook entries, Charmin's confession, and the forensic evidence all painted a clear picture of his guilt. The police believed that Oliver had manipulated Charmin into helping him with his plan, using her troubled past and emotional attachment to him. The detectives continued to piece together the events leading up to the murder. They learned that Oliver had meticulously planned the crime, ensuring that Charmin would have an alibi and that evidence would point away from him initially. His cold and calculated approach made the crime even more chilling. With Oliver in custody, the police shifted their focus to preparing for the upcoming trial. They were determined to ensure that both Oliver and Charmin would face the consequences of their actions. The arrest was a significant step towards justice for Caroline Stevens, but the case was far from over. The trial for the murder of Caroline Stevens began on November 15, 2017. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and members of Caroline's family. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Margaret Ellis, 45, presented a strong case against Dr. Oliver Stevens. Margaret was known for her meticulous approach and her passion for seeking justice. She argued that Oliver had orchestrated the murder to be with Charmin Brisco, their former foster daughter, without any obstacles. The prosecution laid out the evidence in a clear and compelling manner. They presented the notebook entries written by Charmin, which detailed her frustrations with Caroline and hinted at a plan to make that bleep pay. They also showed the blood-stained gloves found in Charmin's apartment and the forensic analysis that linked them to Caroline's murder. Margaret emphasized Oliver's quick marriage to Charmin just days after the murder, portraying it as proof of his motive. The defense, led by attorney Jonathan Ray, 50, faced an uphill battle. Jonathan was a seasoned lawyer known for his calm demeanor and strategic thinking. He argued that Charmin acted alone out of jealousy and that Oliver had no part in the crime. The defense attempted to discredit Charmin's confession, suggesting that she had been coerced by the police. Jonathan also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence. claiming that it was circumstantial and did not directly link Oliver to the murder. Caroline's family watched the trial with a mix of grief and determination. Her brother, David Miller, often spoke to reporters during breaks, expressing hope that justice would be served. The emotional toll on the family was evident as they listened to the details of Caroline's brutal death. After several weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for 2 days. On December 10, 2017, they returned with a verdict. Oliver Stevens was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read. Oliver remained stoic, showing little reaction. Charmin, who was also present, broke down in tears. The judge sentenced Oliver to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the heinous nature of the crime and the premeditation involved. Charmin received a lighter sentence of 25 years for her role in the murder, acknowledging her cooperation with the police. The verdict brought a sense of closure to Caroline's family, though the pain of her loss remained. They felt justice had been served, but the memories of Caroline would always linger. The community of Corvallis was shocked by the events, but many were relieved that the case had been resolved. The trial and its outcome had a profound impact on those involved. Caroline's friends and family found some solace in the verdict, while Oliver and Charmin faced the consequences of their actions. The story of Carolyn Stevens' murder served as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of seeking justice. After the trial, life in Corvallis began to settle into a new normal, though the impact of the case lingered for everyone involved. Dr. Oliver Stevens was serving his life sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary. The prison, located in Salem, became his new home, where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Oliver's former colleagues and students at Oregon State University were shocked and saddened by his conviction. The university had to manage the fallout from the scandal, including addressing concerns from students and faculty about their safety and the integrity of their institution. Charmin Brisco, sentenced to 25 years, was transferred to the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, a women's prison near Wilsonville. Charmin's life in prison was difficult. She faced challenges adapting to her new environment and had to cope with the consequences of her actions. The media continued to follow her story, and she became a figure of public interest, often highlighted in local news reports. For the Stevens friends and supporters, the case became a rallying point for greater awareness and support for victims of crime. Various memorials and events were held in Caroline's honor, helping to keep her memory alive and ensure that her legacy of compassion and service continued. As time went on, life in Corvallis gradually returned to its normal pace, but the story of Caroline Stevens and the dramatic events surrounding her murder remained a significant part of the town's history. The trial and its outcome served as a stark reminder of the importance of justice and the impact of crime on individuals and communities alike. Joel Donovan, 29, was a Boston native who worked as a successful software engineer at a small tech company in the city. He grew up in a lower middle-class family and had always been known for his intelligence and problem-solving skills. After attending Northeastern University, where he earned a degree in computer science and a reputation as a prodigy, Joel quickly found success in his career. His laid-back personality, dry sense of humor, and sharp mind made him well-liked by his friends and colleagues. In his personal life, Joel was deeply in love with his fiancée, Rebecca Abernathy, 27. The two had met through mutual friends in Boston, and their relationship had grown quickly. Friends described Joel as being smitten with Rebecca, who was outgoing and full of energy, a stark contrast to his more reserved nature. Despite their differences, they seemed to complement each other well. Rebecca had also developed a close friendship with Joel's mother, Patricia Donovan. The two went and bonded over their shared interest and spent a lot of time together. Joel's love for Rebecca was evident to everyone around him, and he believed they were a perfect match. They had planned a beautiful wedding to take place at a ranch near Marana, Arizona, in late February 2020, choosing the venue for its scenic views and rustic charm. However, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, Joel began to notice Rebecca's odd behavior. She seemed distant and distracted, often disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. This led to growing suspicion in Joel's mind. Still, he tried to push these thoughts aside, hoping that it was just pre-wedding stress. The day before the wedding, Joel spent time with his best man and close friend, Patrick Walsh, and they talked about their futures. Joel shared how excited he was to marry Rebecca and to start the next chapter of his life. He had plans to move to a bigger house and maybe even start a family soon. But those dreams were cut tragically short just one day later. On the afternoon of February 22, 2020, what was supposed to be a joyful wedding day took a horrific turn. It was around 4:30 p.m. when Jewel Donovan's body was discovered at a picturesque ranch near Marana, Arizona. The ranch, a popular wedding venue known for its sprawling desert views and rustic barns, had been transformed for Joel and Rebecca's wedding. But instead of celebrating, guests were left shocked and horrified by what unfolded. Joel was found by his best man and close friend, Patrick Walsh. After hearing a commotion following Joel's shocking accusation that his new wife was a cheater during his wedding speech, Patrick rushed to check on his friend. He found Joel lying on the floor near the reception area, covered in blood. Joel had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. The knife, which had been used to cut the wedding cake earlier in the evening, lay nearby, stained with blood. Patrick was in disbelief. He had known Joel for most of his life, and never imagined something like this could happen on what should have been one of the happiest days of his lives. His initial reaction was panic. Shaking, he called 911 and tried to explain what he had found. His voice was shaky as he told the dispatcher that Joel had been stabbed and was unresponsive. Several wedding guests had also seen the aftermath and were screaming in terror, adding to the chaos. Within minutes, the venue turned into a scene of confusion. Guests were ushered away from the crime scene, many of them still in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Some guests, who had been enjoying the open bar and taking pictures with their smartphones, found themselves documenting a murder scene instead. Photos and videos taken earlier in the day quickly spread on social media, with many people sharing their disbelief at how quickly the celebration turned into tragedy. Patrick tried to administer first aid, but quickly realized there was nothing more he could do. Joel was already gone by the time paramedics arrived. It was a gruesome sight. Blood pooled on the floor, Joel's tuxedo soaked red, and his eyes wide open in shock. The paramedics officially pronounced Joel dead on the scene, and the entire venue was put on lockdown while local authorities arrived to begin their investigation. Police arrived at the ranch near Marana, Arizona, at approximately 5:00 p.m. on February 22, 2020, just minutes after receiving Patrick Walsh's 911 call. Leading the investigation was Detective Martina Morales, a seasoned investigator with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Known for her calm demeanor and sharp instincts, Morales immediately took charge of the chaotic situation. As the sun began to set over the desert, the ranch's picturesque setting clashed with the grim scene inside the reception area. Blood was splattered across the wooden floor where Joel Donovan's body lay, his tuxedo soaked in red. The wedding cake, which had been beautifully decorated with desert flowers, stood nearby, its knife now a murder weapon. Guests had been ushered outside by staff, some still wearing their formal attire, visibly shaken by the horrific events. Detective Morales and her team immediately began surveying the area, carefully marking off sections of the reception hall with yellow crime scene tape. They started by photographing the scene and collecting potential evidence. The murder weapon, the cake knife, was the first piece of evidence collected. Morales noted that it appeared to have been wiped hastily, likely in a panic by the attacker, but blood traces were still clearly visible on the blade. Joel had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, each wound deep and precise. Based on the angle of the stab wounds, the detectives believed the attacker had been standing close to him, possibly face to face. Blood spatter analysis was done to determine the sequence of events, with experts using luminal spray to check for any hidden bloodstains that might have been missed by the naked eye. Morales quickly interviewed the guests, many of whom were still in shock, their wedding clothes rumpled and their faces pale. Everyone described hearing Joel's shocking accusation during his wedding speech. "My wife is a cheater," followed by a loud commotion. Some guests reported seeing a masked intruder rushing through the crowd moments after Joel collapsed. However, no one could give a clear description of the attacker. Security footage from the venue was immediately retrieved, and officers began reviewing it on site. Morales hoped that it would reveal more about the mysterious masked intruder, but the video quality was poor, making it difficult to identify anyone clearly. With the scene secured and evidence collected, Morales knew this would be a long and complex case. The investigation was just beginning. The first suspect the police turned their attention to was Rebecca Abernethy Donovan, the 27-year-old bride and Joel Donovan's new wife. In the hours following the murder, Rebecca was taken to the Pima County Sheriff's Office for questioning. Still wearing her white wedding dress, now stained with blood, Rebecca appeared dazed and in shock. She was a marketing executive from Boston, known for her outgoing personality and her tendency to enjoy the spotlight, a sharp contrast to her husband's more reserved nature. Detective Morales led the interrogation. Her goal was to determine whether Rebecca had any involvement in Joel's murder. From the start, Rebecca was emotional, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of the day. She described her marriage to Joel as mostly happy, though she admitted they had experienced difficulties leading up to the wedding, she said tearfully. Rebecca's emotions fluctuated wildly during the interview, swinging between sobbing and stunned silence. When Morales brought up Joel's shocking accusation, his claim that Rebecca had been unfaithful, Rebecca's face went pale. She initially denied everything, claiming she had no idea what Joel was talking about. However, the police were already aware of Joel's suspicions about Rebecca's affair. They had learned from friends and family that Joel had grown distant and paranoid in the weeks before the wedding, convinced that Rebecca was hiding something. Under further questioning, Rebecca's calm began to crack. Her responses became evasive, and she grew defensive when pressed about the affair. Morales noted that Rebecca's emotion seemed exaggerated at times, raising suspicions about whether she was hiding something. However, despite her suspicious behavior, Rebecca denied any involvement in Joel's murder. She insisted that she had been frozen in shock when Joel was attacked, and had no idea who the masked intruder was. Rebecca's secret affair, it turned out, wasn't just with anyone. It was with another woman. The revelation of this affair added a complicated twist to the case. Joel had apparently caught Rebecca sending sexually explicit texts just hours before the ceremony, and his accusation during the wedding speech had been his way of exposing her. Although Rebecca's affair was a clear motive for tension between her and Joel, there was no direct evidence linking her to the murder. She was released after several hours of questioning, but remained under close surveillance as the investigation continued. The investigation took a dramatic turn on the morning of February 23, 2020, the day after Joel Donovan's murder. The weather was clear and crisp, with temperatures hovering in the mid-60s, typical for the Arizona desert in late winter. While the police had been initially stumped by the masked intruder's identity, new evidence emerged that added a shocking layer to the case. Around 10:00 a.m., Detective Morales received a call from one of the wedding venue's cleaning staff. The worker had been tidying up the honeymoon suite when she discovered something unusual, a pair of torn women's undergarments beneath the bed, along with a half-empty bottle of champagne. The discovery prompted Morales to order a full sweep of the suite. What they found next would change the course of the investigation. In the bed, they found traces of bodily fluids, confirming that a sexual act had taken place just hours before the wedding. DNA testing later revealed that both Rebecca Abernethy Donovan and Joel's own mother, Patricia Donovan, had been having sex in the bed together. This was the breakthrough the police needed. It turned out that moments before the wedding ceremony, Joel had walked in on Rebecca and Patricia having sex in the honeymoon suite. Overcome with shock and rage, Joel left the suite without confronting them, deciding instead to make a public spectacle at the wedding. It was this moment of heartbreak and fury that led to Joel's explosive declaration during his wedding speech. "My wife is a cheater." He had been planning to expose both his mother and his bride in front of all the guests. According to interviews with friends and family, Joel had been suspicious of Rebecca's behavior for weeks, but had never expected to catch her in such a betrayal with his own mother. Detective Morales now had a clearer understanding of the motive behind Joel's outburst, as well as a better picture of the emotional state of both Rebecca and Patricia at the time of the murder. The affair was a secret that neither woman wanted to come to light, and Joel's exposure of their relationship had shattered the facade they built. With this new evidence, Morales shifted her focus back to Rebecca and Patricia. The wedding day betrayal had set the stage for the murder, and it was becoming clear that the motive was deeply personal. Now, Morales needed to determine whether it was Rebecca, Patricia, or someone else who had taken the ultimate step to silence Joel forever. After uncovering the shocking affair between Rebecca Abernethy Donovan and Patricia Donovan, the police turned their attention to Joel's mother, Patricia, as the second key suspect. At 61 years old, Patricia was a well-known figure in her small town outside Boston, where she owned a popular diner, Donovan's Diner, which had been featured in a 2018 Boston Globe article for its classic comfort food. Despite her public reputation as a hardworking businesswoman and a devoted single mother, Patricia had a secret life that few knew about. For nearly 4 months, Patricia had been involved in a sexual affair with Rebecca, her son's fiancée, The affair had started innocently enough, with Rebecca confiding in Patricia about her cold feet as the wedding approached. But what began as emotional support quickly turned into something more. Patricia had developed intense sexual feelings for Rebecca and had grown possessive of her, desperate to keep their relationship hidden from Joel and the rest of their family. When Joel discovered them having sex in the honeymoon suite hours before the ceremony, Patricia knew everything was about to unravel. After Joel's public accusation at the wedding, Patricia had remained silent, trying to keep her composure as her son exposed her darkest secret. Her facade cracked when Joel was murdered in front of all the guests, stabbed by a masked intruder. Patricia became a prime suspect, as her emotional connection to Rebecca and the humiliation she faced gave her a strong motive to silence Joel. Detective Morales interrogated Patricia for several hours at the Pima County Sheriff's Office. During the questioning, Patricia appeared calm but deeply emotional, often pausing to wipe away tears. She admitted to the affair with Rebecca, but vehemently denied any involvement in her son's murder. However, the detectives noted inconsistencies in her story. Patricia claimed to have been in shock during the attack, yet several wedding guests reported seeing her leaving the area before Joel was stabbed. Despite her denials, Patricia's behavior during the interrogation raised red flags. Her emotional state shifted rapidly, from sorrow to anger, as Morales pressed her on the details of the affair and its aftermath. Although Patricia continued to deny any involvement in the murder, her possessiveness over Rebecca and the shame of being publicly exposed made her a compelling suspect. However, without direct evidence linking her to the attack, the police couldn't yet make an arrest. For now, Patricia remained the suspect, her secrets threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. The third suspect the police focused on was Patrick Daniel Walsh, Joel Donovan's best man and lifelong friend. Patrick, 29, was a middle school teacher back in Boston. Known for his outgoing personality and laid-back attitude, he was a fixture in Joel's life since they were kids. They'd grown up together, attended college at the same time, and shared a close bond. Patrick had always been seen as a bit of a womanizer, often dating multiple women at once, but no one ever expected him to be tied to such a brutal crime. At the wedding, Patrick had stood just a few feet away from Joel during the shocking outburst where Joel accused Rebecca of cheating. Patrick had been one of the first people to rush to Joel's side after the stabbing, shouting for someone to call 911. Despite his apparent distress, the police couldn't overlook the fact that Patrick had been very close to both Joel and Rebecca in the months leading up to the wedding, and there were rumors he knew about an affair long before the ceremony. It was later revealed that Patrick had actually discovered Rebecca's affair with Patricia Donovan weeks before the wedding, but had kept it quiet. According to testimony from other family friends, Patrick had seen Rebecca sneaking around with Patricia during wedding planning trips but chose not to tell Joel. The reason? Patrick had been secretly sexually involved with Rebecca too. Their brief fling had started after a late-night conversation over drinks during one of those wedding planning weekends. Patrick had hoped it would continue, but Rebecca had ended it quickly, telling him she was committed to marrying Joel. Detectives questioned Patrick in the days following the murder. He appeared visibly shaken but cooperative. When asked why he hadn't come forward with the affair sooner, Patrick admitted he didn't want to hurt his friend. But the police couldn't ignore the possibility that Patrick's silence and close relationship with both Joel and Rebecca might have given him a motive. While Patrick's involvement in the affair added another layer of complexity to the case, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murder scene. Still, his proximity to the crime and his relationship with both the bride and the victim kept him firmly on the list of suspects. It wasn't until the police took a closer look at the chaos unfolding at the Donovan wedding that they began to piece together the truth. The murder investigation had already examined Rebecca, Joel's bride, and Patrick, the best man, as suspects. But as more guests were interviewed, attention shifted to someone who, at first, seemed like an unlikely culprit, Joel's own mother, Patricia Donovan. Patricia Donovan, 61, had built a reputation in Boston as a successful diner owner. She was well known for her strong work ethic and no-nonsense attitude. But underneath that polished exterior, Patricia had been hiding a secret affair with her son's fiancée, Rebecca. The affair had been going on for months, and Joel discovered the shocking truth just hours before the wedding. According to a close friend of the couple, Joel had walked in on Rebecca and Patricia having sex in the bed of their honeymoon suite moments before the ceremony. Overwhelmed with heartbreak and anger, Joel decided to expose their affair during his wedding speech. In front of the entire crowd, he screamed, "My wife's a cheater. bringing their secret out into the open. This public humiliation was too much for Patricia. As she stood there, reeling from the shock of being exposed by her own son, Patricia snapped. Overcome with a mixture of rage and desperation, she changed into a hoodie and jeans before grabbing a knife from the nearby wedding cake table. In a blind fury, she stabbed Joel multiple times in the chest. Guests watched in horror, unable to comprehend how the joyous occasion had turned so violently tragic. Investigators had initially suspected Rebecca, but as they combed through witness statements and pieced together the timeline of events, they realized Patricia's behavior was more suspicious. Surveillance footage from the venue showed Patricia acting nervously in the moments leading up to the stabbing, and multiple guests reported seeing her approach Joel just before the attack. On March 2, 2020, police arrested Patricia Donovan at her home in Boston. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she showed little emotion as officers led her away in handcuffs. The news of Patricia's arrest devastated Joel's family and friends. The thought of a mother killing her own son over an affair left them heartbroken and searching for answers. Many struggled to understand how Patricia's secret obsession had turned so deadly. The trial of Patricia Donovan began in late November 2021 back at the Pima County Superior Court in Arizona. The prosecution, led by 45-year-old Assistant District Attorney Maria Foxcomb, laid out a clear and shocking case. Foxcomb, known for her methodical and passionate approach, argued that Patricia had been driven by a toxic combination of shame, obsession, and jealousy. She painted a picture of a woman so desperate to protect her affair with her son's fiancée that she resorted to murder when it was exposed in front of all their wedding guests. Foxcomb played surveillance footage from the wedding venue showing Patricia's erratic behavior leading up to the stabbing. She called multiple witnesses who had seen Patricia grabbing the knife intended for the wedding cake and using it to fatally stab her son, Joel Donovan. On the defense side was 54-year-old Mark Dempsey, a seasoned attorney known for his skill in high-profile cases. Dempsey argued that Patricia acted out of a moment of intense emotional distress and shouldn't be held fully responsible for her actions. He claimed the public humiliation caused by Joel's outburst had pushed her into a temporary psychotic break. Dempsey tried to convince the jury that Patricia's mental state should lead to a reduced charge of manslaughter instead of murder. The jury deliberated for just under 2 days. On December 15, 2021, Patricia Donovan was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentencing was swift, minus 20 years to life in an Arizona state prison. Many of Joel's family members felt that justice had been served, but the pain of losing him in such a horrific way would never fade. Patricia, on the other hand, showed little reaction to the verdict, staring blankly as the sentence was read. The verdict left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Joel's friends and family were left to pick up the pieces, grappling with the complicated emotions of love, betrayal, and loss. After Patricia Donovan's trial and sentencing, life for everyone involved took a dramatic turn. The Donovan family, once well-respected in their Boston community, was now overshadowed by the tragic events that unfolded in Marana, Arizona. Rebecca Abernethy Donovan, Patricia's lover, and Joel's widow, faced intense public scrutiny. Shunned by many in Boston, Rebecca struggled to find stability. She left her marketing job, unable to cope with the backlash from both her professional and personal circles. She also moved to a different city to escape the constant media attention. Rebecca's former colleagues at her old job, a marketing firm known for its innovative campaigns, expressed shock and disappointment over the scandal. In contrast, Patrick Daniel Walsh, Joel's best man, tried to rebuild his life. Though he was never charged with any crime, Patrick faced significant fallout due to his affair with Rebecca. His reputation as a school teacher suffered, and he found it hard to maintain his friendships and professional relationships. Patrick took a leave of absence from his teaching position at Boston's East End Middle School and started a new job in a different state, away from the intense scrutiny of his past. Patricia Donovan began serving her 20-to-life sentence in a state prison in Arizona. Her once orderly life had unraveled completely. Patricia's incarceration was marked by a series of struggles as she adjusted to prison life. The emotional toll of her actions, coupled with the isolation from her family, made her remaining years behind bars particularly challenging. The impact of the case extended beyond the immediate families involved. The Marana wedding venue, once a symbol of celebration, became a somber reminder of the tragedy. Local media continued to cover the story, keeping the community's attention on the shocking events of that February day. Life for everyone connected to the case had been forever changed. The search for normalcy amid the aftermath of such a tragic and public event was an ongoing struggle for all involved.